You wake before dawn, though you cannot call it waking in the way you once knew that word. There is no sudden opening of eyes, no startled return to the world. Instead, you surface slowly from sleep like a stone rising through dark water, pulled upward by the first bell of vigils, a single bronze note that shivers through the winter air and finds you in your narrow bed. The cold has already found you too. It pressed itself against you through the night, patient and inexorable as a tide, seeping through the wool blanket and the rough linen of your habit, settling into your bones with the intimacy of something that knows it will not be refused. You lie still for a moment in the darkness, breathing small clouds into the blackness above your face, and you remember that this is your life now. This stone room. This cold. This bell. The cell around you is invisible in these hours before dawn, but you know its dimensions by heart now, after months of the same waking, the same rising. 6 feet by 8. Stone walls 2 feet thick, lime-washed once each spring, now gray and shadowed even in daylight. A single narrow window, unglazed, with wooden shutters that you closed last night against the wind but which do nothing to stop the cold. It pours through the cracks like water through a sieve, pooling on the stone floor where your bare feet will soon touch down. There is the bed, a wooden frame with rope supports and a thin straw mattress that crackles when you move. There is the small wooden chest at the foot of the bed, containing everything you own in this world, a second habit for summer, a spare pair of woolen hose, a comb, a small wooden cross your mother pressed into your hand the day you entered this monastery. There is a wooden shelf on the wall where a clay oil lamp sits now, unlit. There is the darkness, vast and complete. You do not light the lamp yet. Oil is precious in winter. Instead you swing your legs slowly over the side of the bed and you feel for the cold stone floor with your toes, finding it, accepting the shock of it, letting it wake you fully. Around you, through the stone walls, you can hear the other brothers stirring in their cells, the creak of rope beds, the shuffle of feet, a cough from the cell to your left, long and deep and wet. Brother Thomas. His cough has been worsening for weeks now, since the first hard freeze in November. It is January now, or you believe it to be January. Time moves differently here. The feast days mark its passage more clearly than any counting of days, and the last feast was Epiphany, 3 or perhaps 4 days ago. You said prayers over blessed chalk and Brother Anselm, the prior, marked the doorway of the church with the symbols of the year and the initials of the Magi. 20 plus C plus M plus B plus whatever year this is in the reign of our Lord. 1400 and something. 12. 15. The exact year sometimes slips from you in the sameness of the days, but it does not matter. The year is winter. The year is cold. The year is the ringing of this bell. You stand and reach for your clothes, feeling for them in the dark. You slept in your under tunic, as you do every night from October until April, but you need your habit, your scapular, your hood. The wool is stiff with cold when you lift it, the fabric reluctant to bend. You pull it over your head and the wool scrapes against your face, smelling of smoke and stone and the particular mustiness that woolen things acquire when they are never quite dry, never quite warm. You wrap the scapular over your shoulders and pull the hood up over your tonsured head, which is always cold now, the bare crown of scalp exposed by the razor every Sunday somehow colder than any other part of you. You find your hose, pull them on. Your shoes, simple leather things, worn thin at the soles, you leave for now. You will put them on before you leave the cell. For this moment you simply stand in the darkness, breathing, listening. The bell rings again. Closer now, more insistent. Brother Benedict in the bell tower, pulling the rope with his thick-fingered hands, calling you all to prayer. You have perhaps 5 minutes to make your way through the cloister to the church. 5 minutes to cross the frozen garth, the open courtyard at the center of the monastery, where the winter wind comes howling down from the hills and finds nothing to stop it but your body, small and wool-wrapped and hurrying through the dark. You have done this every night for months. You will do it every night for months more, until the spring, if the spring ever comes. Sometimes you wonder if winter is not simply the permanent condition of the world now, if this cold is not the new and final state of all things. But that is a thought for later, or never. Now there is only the bell, and the dark, and the need to move. You slip your feet into your shoes and you open the wooden door of your cell. The corridor beyond is no warmer than your room. It is a long, narrow passage with a vaulted stone ceiling, lined on both sides with the doors of cells like yours. A few of the brothers have already emerged and are making their way toward the night stairs that lead down to the church. You can see their shapes, dark on dark, moving slowly and carefully because the stone floor is slick in places with ice that has formed from the dampness in the air. You join them, falling into the silent procession, keeping your eyes down as the rule requires. No one speaks. Speaking is not forbidden at this hour, not technically, but there is an understanding among you all that the silence of the night offices is a deeper silence, a more sacred silence, than the silence of the day. It is the silence of the world before the world was spoken into being. To break it would be to tear something. You reach the night stairs and you descend carefully, one hand on the cold stone wall for balance. The stairs are steep and narrow, spiraling down through the thick wall of the dormitory building, and they are worn smooth by decades of feet, centuries perhaps. This monastery is old, older than anyone now living, founded in the time of the conquest or before. The records are unclear. The stones themselves seem ancient, quarried from the hills around this place and cut by hands long since returned to dust. As you descend you can feel the weight of the building above you, the immense and silent mass of stone that houses you all, and you think, as you often do, about what it means to live inside stone, to choose stone over wood, stone over thatch, stone over all the warmer, softer materials that human beings might use to shelter themselves from the world. Stone is eternal, or as close to eternal as human work can come. Stone does not rot, does not burn easily, does not bow to wind. But stone is cold, and stone remembers the cold, holds it the way it holds everything, indiscriminate and patient. At the bottom of the stairs you emerge into the south transept of the church. Here there is a little light at last. Candles have been lit on the altar and in the choir, small flames that do almost nothing to warm the space but which give you something to orient yourself by. You cross the transept and enter the choir, finding your place in the stalls on the north side, the side where the younger brothers stand. The prior and the older brothers, the ones who have been here for decades, stand on the south side, closer to what little warmth rises from the candles. You do not begrudge them this. If you live long enough, if you persist in this life, you too will stand on the south side one day. For now you take your place among the younger men and you lower your head and you wait. The church is enormous around you, a space so large that the candlelight barely defines it. You know its proportions in daylight, a nave that stretches 80 feet from the west door to the crossing, transepts that extend 30 feet to north and south, a chancel and an apse beyond where the altar sits. The ceiling is ribbed stone vaulting, 40 feet above your head, soaring up into shadow. There are windows, tall and narrow, with shutters closed against the night. In summer, light pours through those windows in great golden shafts, illuminating the dust in the air, making the stone glow. In winter the shutters stay closed and the church is a cave, and you are creatures living at the bottom of it, small and cold and singing into the dark. Brother Anselm, the prior, moves to the center of the choir. He is a tall man, thin as a pike, with a long, deeply lined face and eyes that seem always to be looking at something just beyond whatever is in front of him. He has been prior here for 15 years, and he has been a monk in this place for 40 years before that. He is perhaps 60 now, perhaps older. He does not speak of his age or his life before the monastery, and the rule discourages such questions. What matters is not who you were but who you are becoming in this life of prayer and work in silence. He raises his hand and he begins the office. Domini, labia mea aperis. His voice is thin and dry in the cold air, but it carries. The rest of you respond, your voices joining his, a single voice made of many voices. Eti os meum annunciabit laudem tuum. O Lord, open my lips, and my mouth shall declare your praise. You sing the psalms of vigils, the long night office, the office that takes place in the deepest and darkest part of the night. There are 12 psalms, or sometimes more, depending on the day, and there are readings from scripture and from the lives of the saints, and there are hymns, and there are prayers. It will take an hour, perhaps longer. You sing standing up, as you always do, because to sit would be to give in to the cold and the exhaustion, and the rule teaches that prayer is not meant to be comfortable. You sing in Latin, the words you have known since boyhood, since you first came here at 13 or 14, given to this place by your family as a tithe to God. You do not think about the meaning of the words as you sing them, not consciously. The meaning is in the singing itself, in the act of lifting your voice with the voices of your brothers, in the rhythm and the repetition, in the way the same psalms return day after day, week after week, year after year, until they are no longer words but something deeper than words, a kind of breathing. The cold is extraordinary. That is the word that comes to you as you stand in the choir, singing. Extraordinary. Beyond the ordinary. The cold in this church is not like the cold outside, where at least there is sometimes wind, sometimes movement. Here the cold is still and absolute. It sits in the air like a presence. It rises from the stone floor, which has not been warm since October and will not be warm again until May. It descends from the vaulted ceiling, where the heat of your bodies and your breath rises and vanishes into the vast dark overhead, doing nothing, warming nothing. You can see your breath in the candlelight, small clouds that dissolve as you sing. Your fingers are numb inside your sleeves. Your feet have lost all feeling. There is a pain in your chest, a tightness that comes from breathing cold air for an hour or more, and you know that you will cough later, that you will feel this cold in your lungs for hours after the office ends. But you do not stop singing. None of you stop. To stop would be to fail in the one task you have been given, the task that defines your entire existence here, to pray without ceasing, to sanctify the hours, to stand between the world and the silence of God and to fill that silence with your voices. You watch the prior as he leads the office. His face is calm, almost serene, though you can see that he is cold. Everyone is cold, by the way he holds himself, the slight hunch of his shoulders, the way his hands are tucked into his sleeves when they are not needed for turning the pages of the great psalter that rests on the lectern before him. He has done this every night for 40 years. 40 winters in this choir. 40 years of vigils in the dark and the cold. You try to imagine it and you cannot. You have been here 3 years, perhaps 4, and already there are mornings when you wake and you do not know if you can rise, if you can bear another day of the cold and the silence and the stone. But Brother Anselm rises. Every night he rises. Every night he stands here and he sings, and there is something in that persistence, in that sheer endurance, that awes you and steadies you. If he can do this for 40 years, you can do it for one more day. The office moves toward its conclusion. The final psalm is sung, the final prayers are said. Brother Anselm gives the blessing and you all bow your heads to receive it. Then, in silence, you process out of the choir and back through the church toward the night stairs. Some of the brothers will return to their cells now, to sleep for a few more hours until the bell rings for lauds at dawn. But you do not. You have drawn the night watch this week, which means that after vigils you will go to the warming room, the kale factory, and you will tend the fire there through the remaining hours of the night, making sure it does not go out, making sure that when the brothers come in the morning to warm themselves before the day's work begins, there will be heat waiting for them. You make your way across the cloister, across the open garth where the wind cuts through your habit like a blade. The sky above is black and clear, bitter cold, scattered with more stars than you have ever seen in your life. On nights like this, when the air is dry and the cold is deep, the stars seem close enough to touch, hard and bright as chips of ice. You do not look at them for long. To stop moving is to invite the cold deeper in. You cross the garth quickly and you enter the east range of the cloister, where the warming room is located. The warming room is small, perhaps 15 feet square, with a vaulted ceiling and a fireplace set into the north wall. It is the only room in the entire monastery, apart from the kitchen and the infirmary, where a fire is allowed to burn during the day. In the coldest part of winter the fire burns here from morning until night, and the brothers are permitted to come in, a few at a time, to warm their hands and feet before returning to their work. At night, during the dark hours between vigils and lauds, the fire is kept alive but banked low, smoldering rather than blazing, to conserve wood. Your task is to keep it alive. You enter the room and you close the door behind you, and the relief is immediate and overwhelming. It is warm here. Not warm the way a room in summer is warm, not warm the way you remember your mother's kitchen being warm when you were a child. But warm compared to everything else, warm enough that you can feel your fingers begin to ache as the blood returns to them, warm enough that you can lower your hood and unwrap your scapular and simply stand for a moment, soaking in the heat like a plant soaking in sun. The fire is low, a bed of red coals glowing in the darkness of the hearth. You kneel before it and you take up the poker, a long iron rod, and you stir the coals gently, carefully, coaxing them back to life. You add a few small pieces of wood from the stack beside the hearth, not too much, wood is precious, every log must be made to last, and you blow gently on the coals until the wood catches, until small flames begin to lick up around it. Then you sit back on your heels and you watch the fire grow. This is your favorite time. You do not say this to anyone, because to have a favorite time feels like a sin of attachment, a preference for comfort over discipline, but it is true nonetheless. These hours alone in the warming room, tending the fire, watching the light play across the stone walls, feeling the heat on your face, these are the hours when you feel most at peace, most certain that you have made the right choice in coming here. Outside, the monastery sleeps. Outside, the winter presses against the walls and the cold waits, patient as a wolf. But here, in this small room, there is light and warmth and a task that is simple and good and necessary. You are keeping something alive. You are standing watch against the dark. You settle yourself on the wooden bench that runs along the east wall, pulling your feet up under you, wrapping your habit around yourself. You will need to add wood to the fire every half hour or so, to make sure it does not die. Between those times you can rest, you can pray, you can simply sit in the warmth and the quiet. Sometimes, on nights like this, you think about your life before the monastery. You are not supposed to. The rule teaches that you have died to your old life, that you are born anew in this place, and to dwell on what was is to refuse what is. But sometimes you cannot help it. You think about your family, your village, the particular quality of light through the trees in the forest where you used to play as a child. You think about your mother's hands, rough and red from work, and the way she used to sing while she kneaded bread. You think about your brother, younger than you by 2 years, and you wonder if he is alive, if he survived the fever that was moving through the village the year you left. You will never know. You will never see him again, never see any of them again. That is the bargain you made when you entered this place. You gave up the world, and the world gave you up. But you do not feel sorrow when you think these thoughts. Or you do, but it is a distant sorrow, an old sorrow, worn smooth by time and repetition like the stones of the night stairs. What you feel mostly is a kind of quiet wonder that you are here at all, that your life has taken this shape, that you wake every morning in a stone cell and you sing in a freezing church and you spend your days in silence and cold and you are, in some way you do not entirely understand, content. Not happy, exactly. Happiness is not the word for what you feel. But content. At peace. Aligned, somehow, with something larger than yourself. The fire crackles and pops, sending up a small shower of sparks. You watch them rise and fade, little brief lives, there and gone. You think about warmth, about what it means to be warm in winter, about the fact that for most of human history, for most people in the world even now, winter was a kind of dying, a slow and grinding test of endurance that many did not survive. You think about the villages beyond these walls, where families huddle together in one-room huts, where the fire and the hearth is the difference between life and death, where children and old people die when the cold goes on too long or the food runs out. You are sheltered from the worst of that here. The monastery is stone and strong and provisioned for winter, with grain in the stores and beans in barrels and dried fish hanging in the larder. You will not starve. You will not freeze, not quite. But neither are you comfortable. The cold is a constant presence, a constant weight, and you understand, sitting here in the small warmth of the warming room, that this is intentional. The cold is part of the discipline, part of the training. To live in stone in winter is to learn something about endurance, about the body and its limits, about the small and necessary pleasures of warmth and rest when they come. It is to learn that you are not owed comfort, that comfort is not the point of life, that there is something to be found in discomfort, in cold, in the stripping away of everything soft and easy until only the essential remains. You rise and add another log to the fire. Outside, beyond the walls, you can hear the wind beginning to pick up, a low moaning sound that rises and falls, rises and falls. A storm is coming, perhaps. Or perhaps it is only the usual wind of winter, the wind that never stops. You return to the bench and you settle yourself again and you close your eyes. You will not sleep, not deeply, but you can rest in that space between waking and sleeping, where your mind drifts and the warmth of the fire seeps into you and the hours pass without effort or thought. And when the bell rings again, when Brother Benedict pulls the rope in the tower and the bronze voice calls you all back to prayer, you will rise, and you will bank the fire, and you will return to the church, and you will sing. Because that is what you do. That is what you are. You are a man in a stone monastery in winter, and you survive. You stand in the chapter house now, your hands tucked into the wide sleeves of your habit, the wool rough against your forearms. The stone bench beneath you holds the cold of centuries, and you feel it seeping through the fabric, patient and inexorable. Around you, 30 brothers sit in similar postures, their faces illuminated by the weak afternoon light that filters through the narrow windows set high in the walls. Brother Anselm is reading the day's portion from the rule, his voice steady and rhythmic, each Latin syllable falling into the cold air like a stone into still water. You do not need to follow every word. The rhythm itself is enough, the familiar cadence that has ordered every winter day you have known within these walls. The chapter house was built 200 years before your birth, constructed with the same gray limestone that forms every wall, every column, every arch of this monastery. The stones were quarried from the hillside a mile to the east, cut and hauled by the labor of monks long dead, their names preserved only in the prayers said for their souls. The walls are thick, 4 feet in some places, and this thickness is both blessing and burden. In summer, the stone holds the night's coolness through the heat of the day. In winter, it holds the cold with equal faithfulness, never warming fully even when fires burn in the warming room and the kitchen. You have learned to think of the cold not as an enemy but as a condition of existence, as fundamental as the bells that mark the hours or the taste of barley bread. When Brother Anselm finishes reading, the abbot rises. He is an old man, older than most reach in these times, his face deeply lined and his hands gnarled from decades of manual labor. He does not speak immediately. Instead, he looks at each of you in turn, his gaze moving slowly around the circle, and you feel yourself straighten slightly under that scrutiny, not from fear but from the desire to meet his expectation of attentiveness. When he finally speaks, his voice is thin but clear. "Brothers," he says, "we are entering the hardest months. The stores have been counted. The wood has been measured. We have what we have, and we will not have more until spring. This is not news. The counting of stores happens every year at the beginning of Advent, a ritual as fixed as any liturgical observance. But hearing it spoken aloud gives it weight, makes it real in a way that the knowledge alone does not. You think of the grain cellar beneath the refectory, the rows of sacks lined against the walls, the barrels of salted fish and dried peas. You think of the woodpiles stacked in the sheltered arcade behind the kitchen, each log carefully placed to allow air to circulate, to keep the wood as dry as possible in the damp climate. You have helped stack that wood yourself, spending long days in autumn splitting logs and carrying them in armloads from the forest. We will observe the winter schedule from tomorrow, the abbot continues. Matins at the 2nd hour of the night. Lauds at dawn. Prime, terce, sext, none, vespers, and compline at their appointed times. The hours of work will be shortened, but they will not cease. Idleness is the enemy of the soul, and we will not surrender to it merely because the days are dark. You have heard these words before, or words very like them, but they settle into you nonetheless, arranging themselves into the architecture of your expectations for the months ahead. The winter schedule is both mercy and discipline. The night office is moved later, allowing more sleep in the coldest hours before dawn. The work periods are shorter, acknowledging that hands stiffen and bodies tire more quickly in the cold. But the structure remains, the framework of prayer and labor that shapes every day, that gives meaning to the passage of time in this place where one day can seem very much like another. After chapter, you file out with the others into the cloister. The rectangular courtyard at the center of the monastery is open to the sky, and the wind that funnels through it carries the smell of snow, that peculiar clean sharpness that comes before a storm. The cloister walks are covered, roofed with timber and tile, but they offer little protection from the cold. Your breath steams in front of you, and you draw your hood up over your tonsured head, feeling the wool settle heavily on your shoulders. The brothers disperse to their assigned tasks, some to the kitchen, some to the workshop, some to the scriptorium. You are assigned to the warming room today, tasked with tending the fire that burns there from dawn until after Compline. The warming room is adjacent to the dormitory, positioned so that some small amount of heat might rise through the floor above, offering minimal relief to the sleeping monks. It is one of only 2 rooms in the monastery where a fire is permitted to burn all day during winter. The other is the kitchen, where the ovens must be kept hot for baking and cooking. Everywhere else, the church, the dormitory, the scriptorium, the infirmary, remains unheated, subject to whatever warmth can be borrowed from the fires nearby or generated by the presence of human bodies in enclosed spaces. You push open the heavy wooden door to the warming room and step inside. The change is immediate and profound. Heat washes over your face, almost painful after the cold of the cloister. The fire burns in a large stone hearth that occupies most of one wall, the flames licking at oak logs stacked in a careful arrangement. The room itself is not large, perhaps 15 feet on each side, with stone benches built into the walls and a few wooden stools scattered near the hearth. 3 brothers are already here, sitting close to the fire, their hands extended toward the warmth. They look up as you enter, nod in acknowledgement, then return their attention to the flames. You move to the woodpile in the corner and select 2 logs, testing their weight and dryness. The wood is oak, cut from the monastery's forest and seasoned for 2 years before burning. Green wood smokes and hisses, wasting heat and filling the room with stinging vapors. Dry wood burns clean and hot, each log a small treasure of stored sunlight released back into the winter air. You place the logs carefully on the fire, positioning them so they will catch evenly, so the flames can find easy purchase in the bark and sapwood. Brother Thomas, the cellarer, enters the room carrying a clay pot. He sets it on the flat stones at the edge of the hearth, where it will warm slowly. The pot contains wine mixed with water and honey, a small comfort distributed to the brothers before Compline on the coldest nights. It is not luxury, the wine is thin, the honey sparse, but it is warmth from within, a small counterpoint to the cold that presses against every wall. The snow will come tonight, Brother Thomas says, addressing no one in particular. He is a practical man, more comfortable with accounts and measurements than with conversation, but the isolation of winter loosens even his reserve. The clouds have that look, you agree, watching the steam begin to rise from the pot. We should bring the sheep closer to the barn, he continues, still staring into the fire. If it drifts, they will not be able to forage. You nod. The monastery keeps a small flock, perhaps 40 animals, that graze the hillsides in the warmer months and spend winter in a stone barn near the lower fields. The sheep are essential. Their wool provides the raw material for the habits you wear, for the blankets on your beds, for the wrappings that protect your hands when outdoor work cannot be avoided. Their milk, preserved as cheese through the summer and autumn, supplements the sparse winter diet. And when a sheep dies, of age or injury or the harsh attrition of winter, the meat is butchered and distributed, a brief addition of richness to the usual fare of bread and pottage. Brother Thomas leaves, presumably to see to the sheep himself, and you settle onto one of the stone benches. The heat from the fire reaches you in waves, alternating with the cold that radiates from the wall at your back. This is the nature of warmth in winter here. It is never complete, never total. It is always partial, always contested, a small zone of relative comfort carved out of the larger cold. The other brothers rise one by one and leave their allotted time in the warming room complete. The rule is specific about this: no brother may remain by the fire longer than necessary, lest the warmth breed sloth or the desire for comfort become too strong. You are exempt from this restriction today because you are tending the fire, but even so, you do not allow yourself to relax completely. You stand and move away from the hearth, walking the perimeter of the room, feeling the temperature drop with each step toward the walls. The stones here are the same stones that form every part of the monastery: limestone, fine-grained and dense, the color of ash or old bone. When you press your hand against the wall, it feels like touching ice, the cold so absolute it seems to pull heat from your palm. These walls are the monastery's greatest strength and its greatest challenge. They are permanent, solid, capable of lasting centuries without significant decay. But they are also thermal masses, slow to warm and slow to cool, and in winter they become vast reservoirs of cold that no fire can meaningfully affect. The monks who built this place understood this. They built it anyway, because permanence mattered more than comfort, because stone was the material of eternity, of stability, of resistance to the forces of chaos and change. Wood rots. Thatch burns. Clay crumbles. But stone endures, and a monastery built of stone makes a promise to the future, declares its intention to persist through generations, through wars and plagues and the slow turning of seasons into years, into centuries. You feed the fire again, watching the flame spread across the new wood, hearing the snap and pop as pockets of moisture turn to steam and escape. The sound is companionable, a kind of conversation. You have spent many hours like this, alone with the fire, your thoughts moving slowly, following paths worn smooth by repetition. You think about warmth, about what it means to be warm, about the different qualities of heat, the fierce dry heat of flame, the gentle warmth of sunlight, the animal heat of bodies pressed close in sleep, the internal warmth that comes from exertion, from chopping wood or hauling water or walking briskly through the cold. The bell rings for sext, the midday prayer, and you bank the fire carefully before leaving. Banking is an art you learned in your first winter here. The goal is to preserve the coals while reducing the flames, to maintain a bed of heat that can be easily revived but will not consume too much wood while unattended. You arrange the logs so they lie close together, supporting each other, then use the iron poker to pull hot coals over and around them. Finally, you scatter a layer of ash across the top, not thick enough to smother the fire but enough to slow the burn, to trap the heat in the heart of the coals. The church is brutally cold. The stone walls rise 40 feet to the vaulted ceiling, and the space is vast enough to hold the entire community with room to spare. The architecture is beautiful, graceful arches, precisely cut stones fitted together with minimal mortar, narrow windows that fill the interior with a pale, even light, but beauty offers no warmth. You take your place in the choir stalls, the wooden seat hard beneath you, and pull your hands fully into your sleeves, crossing your arms over your chest. Around you, the other brothers do the same, each finding his own small strategy for conserving warmth. The abbot begins the office, and you join your voice to the chorus, the Latin syllables familiar and comforting. The psalms rise and fall, the rhythm hypnotic, and you feel yourself settling into the prayer, the cold receding slightly not because it diminishes but because your attention moves elsewhere. This is one of the gifts of the liturgy, you have found, the way it can occupy the mind fully, leaving no room for discomfort or complaint. The words wash over you and through you, and for the duration of the office, you are not cold, not warm, not anything except a voice among voices, a part of the greater whole. After sext comes dinner, the main meal of the day even in winter. You file into the refectory and stand at your place at the long wooden table, waiting for the abbot's blessing. The refectory is another unheated space, though the warmth from the adjacent kitchen provides some small comfort. The tables are arranged in rows, with benches on either side, and each place is marked by a wooden bowl, a spoon, and a small knife. There are no individual portions. Food is served communally, passed along the tables in large wooden bowls, and each brother takes only what he needs, mindful always of his fellows. Today the meal is pottage, a thick soup of dried peas and barley, flavored with onions and a handful of herbs from the dried bundles hanging in the kitchen. There is bread as well, dark and dense, made from a mixture of wheat and rye flour. And there is ale, weak and slightly sour, served in wooden cups that are refilled once and only once. The food is plain, filling but not satisfying in the way that rich food satisfies. It is fuel, sustenance, the minimum necessary to keep body and soul together through the winter. You eat slowly, chewing carefully, making the meal last. The reader for the week stands at the lectern near the abbot's table, reading from the Confessions of Augustine, his voice rising and falling in the rhythms of that extraordinary prose. You listen with half your attention, the rest focused on the warmth of the pottage in your mouth, the way it spreads through your chest and belly, a brief internal fire. Around you, 30 brothers eat in silence, the only sounds the scrape of spoons against bowls, the rustle of habits as someone shifts position, the occasional cough. The silence is not oppressive. It is, you have learned, a different kind of communication, a shared understanding that transcends words. In silence, you are aware of the others in a way you would not be if conversation filled the room. You notice when Brother Martin, sitting across from you, grimaces slightly as he lifts his cup, his hands are pained by the cold, the joints swollen and stiff. You notice when young Brother Hugh, newly professed and still adjusting to the austerity of monastic life, allows his gaze to linger too long on the bread basket, calculating whether there might be seconds. You notice the abbot's fatigue, visible in the way he holds his shoulders, the slight tremor in his hands. After the meal, there is a brief period of recreation, not leisure, exactly, but a loosening of the strict rule of silence, a time when necessary conversations can happen, when questions can be asked and answered. You stand in the cloister with Brother Cyprian, the herbalist, discussing the inventory of medicines in the infirmary. Winter always brings illness, coughs and fevers, chilblains and joint pain, the occasional case of pneumonia that requires all the skill and prayer the community can muster. Brother Cyprian is worried about the supply of horehound, a bitter herb used to ease coughing. "We have enough for now," he says, his breath steaming in the cold air, "but if the sickness spreads, if many brothers fall ill at once, we will run short before spring." Can we harvest more, you ask, though you already know the answer. Not until the plant flowers again, and that will not be until late spring at the earliest. He pauses, rubbing his hands together. We must pray that the winter is mild, that the sickness does not come. But even as he says it, you both know that the sickness will come. It always comes. Every winter, at least a few brothers fall ill, and every few years, one does not recover. The infirmary has 6 beds, usually sufficient, sometimes desperately inadequate. Brother Cyprian does what he can with the herbs and simples available to him, infusions of horehound and coltsfoot for coughs, poultices of mustard for chest congestion, willow bark tea for fever. But much depends on the strength of the individual, on the will to live, on the grace of God. The bell rings for none, and the brief recreation ends. You return to the church, to the same cold stone, the same hard wooden seats, the same rising and falling of voices in prayer. The light has changed, the thin winter sun is already beginning its descent toward the horizon, and the shadows in the church have lengthened, grown darker. You watch a shaft of light move slowly across the floor as the sun shifts, watch the dust motes suspended in the beam, drifting and turning in currents of air you cannot feel. After none, you return to the warming room to tend the fire again. The coals are still alive, glowing dull red beneath their blanket of ash. You stir them gently with the poker, then add small pieces of kindling, blowing softly until flames appear. Once the kindling catches, you add larger pieces, building the fire back to its earlier vigor. The process is meditative, requiring attention but not intense concentration, and your mind drifts. You think about the forest where the firewood comes from, the oak and beech trees that grow on the monastery's land, carefully managed for generations. The forest is never clear-cut. Instead, trees are selected individually, marked by the forester, then felled and hauled out by teams of brothers working together. For every tree taken, seedlings are planted, a practice that ensures the forest will continue to provide for future generations of monks, for men who are not yet born, who will one day stand where you stand now, tending fires against the winter cold. You think about time, about the way it moves differently here than it does in the world beyond the monastery walls. In the world outside, time is measured by harvests and markets, by births and deaths, by the rise and fall of lords and kingdoms. Here, time is liturgical, marked by the hours of prayer, by the cycle of feast days and fasts, by the rhythm of the seasons as they affect the work of the community. Winter is not just a period of cold, it is a season of waiting, of dormancy, of inward focus. The fields lie fallow. The gardens sleep beneath layers of frost. The bees are shut in their hives, clustered together for warmth, consuming the honey they made in summer. And you, too, are in a kind of dormancy. The intense labor of the growing season has ended. There are no fields to plow, no crops to tend, no hay to cut. The work of winter is smaller, more contained, repairing tools, mending clothes, copying manuscripts in the scriptorium when there is enough light and your fingers are not too stiff to hold the pen. It is a time for study, for contemplation, for the slow work of the spirit that requires stillness and silence and the willingness to sit with discomfort. Brother Michael enters the warming room, his face pale, his movements careful. He is one of the older brothers, past 60, and the cold affects him more severely than it does the younger men. He sits down heavily near the fire, and you see him wince as the warmth reaches his hands, the blood returning to his fingers painful and prickling. "The snow has begun," he says quietly. You move to the door and open it slightly, looking out into the cloister. He is right. Large flakes are falling, visible against the darkening sky, accumulating already on the stone pavement. The wind has dropped, and the snow falls straight down, steady and silent, transforming the familiar courtyard into something strange and dreamlike. You close the door and return to the fire. Tomorrow the world will be white, the paths between buildings obscured, the distinction between earth and sky blurred. The work of the day will begin with shoveling, with clearing paths so that the community can move from dormitory to church, from church to refectory, from refectory to the necessary houses. The cold will deepen. The stones will grow colder still. And you will endure it, as monks have endured it for 200 years in this place, as monks will endure it for centuries to come, if God wills. Brother Michael extends his hands toward the flames, and you sit beside him in silence, the two of you keeping vigil as the snow continues to fall and the world outside grows quieter, smaller, reduced to this room, this fire, this moment of warmth carved out of the encompassing cold. You wake before the bell, as you have learned to do in these long winter months, and the cold is already inside you, not sharp, not cruel, but constant, a companion that neither leaves nor announces itself. The cell around you is dark still, though the quality of the darkness has changed, thin somehow, as if the stones themselves have begun to anticipate dawn. You lie beneath your wool blanket and the sheepskin that Brother Anselm brought you 3 weeks ago, and you feel the weight of them not as warmth exactly but as a barrier, a small mercy between your body and the winter that presses against every surface of this place. Your breath rises in the darkness, visible even in this dim hour, and you watch it dissipate toward the ceiling, toward the cold stones that have absorbed centuries of such breaths, such prayers made visible in vapor. The straw mattress beneath you has compressed over the months until it is hardly thicker than the wooden board it rests upon, and your hip aches where it meets that unyielding surface, a dull persistent reminder that comfort is not the province of this life, not in winter, not in any season, though winter makes the lesson most explicit. You sit up slowly, the blankets falling away, and the cold finds you immediately, your shoulders, your neck, the small of your back where your woolen tunic has ridden up in sleep. You stand, your bare feet meeting the floor, and the stone is so cold it feels almost wet, though you know it is not. No, it is only the way extreme cold can mimic other sensations, can feel like burning or dampness or something living that touches you with intention. You find your second tunic in the darkness, the heavier one, and pull it over the first, and then the scapular, and then you sit again to wrap your feet in the wool strips that serve as hose before pushing them into your boots, the leather stiff with cold until your body begins to soften it. The bell rings then, its voice muted by the thick walls but insistent, and you hear the movement begin in the cells around you, the shuffle and scrape of other men performing this same ritual of dressing, of armoring themselves in layers against the day. You stand again, fully clothed now, though you know the cold has merely been delayed, not defeated, that it will find its way through the wool and linen as the hours pass, patient and thorough. You move to the door, lift the latch, and step into the corridor where the darkness is less complete, where small oil lamps burn at intervals, their flames steady in the still air. The corridor is a river of cold, of air that has pooled here during the night, settling into the lowest places, and as you walk toward the night stairs that lead down to the church, you are aware of the other monks emerging from their cells, joining this silent procession, this current of bodies moving through stone passages toward the one place that will offer even a small measure of warmth. No one speaks. The rule of silence holds even here, perhaps especially here, in these hours before dawn when the world itself seems to be holding its breath. The church is vast and dark when you enter, though candles have been lit on the altar and in the choir, their light not reaching far into the nave but creating a kind of center, a focus for the eye and the spirit. You move to your place in the choir stalls, the assigned position you have occupied for months now, and you stand there waiting as the others file in, as the community assembles itself in the darkness. The stone beneath your feet is no warmer here than in your cell, but the presence of other bodies, the accumulated heat of 40 men standing close together, begins to create a difference in the air, subtle but real, a pocket of slightly less frigid space. Brother Anselm strikes the pitch, his voice rising alone in the darkness, and then the others join, and then you join, and the office begins, the psalms and responses that structure the day, that have structured every day since you arrived here, that have structured the days of monks in this place for longer than anyone now living can remember. The singing itself generates warmth, you have learned, the deep breathing required, the vibration in the chest and throat, the way the sound seems to animate the very air around you. You sing and feel your body wake more fully, feel the blood move more quickly through your limbs, feel the particular grace of this ancient technology of survival, this use of prayer as furnace. The office lasts an hour, perhaps more, and when it ends the silence that follows is different from the silence that preceded it, is warmer somehow, more inhabited. You file out with the others, moving now toward the warming room, the one space in the monastery where a fire is permitted during winter, where the community is allowed to gather for a brief period after the night office to restore themselves before the work of the day begins. The warming room is in the oldest part of the monastery, built centuries ago with a great hearth at its center, and as you approach along the cloister you can smell the smoke, can feel the change in the air that signals heat ahead. Inside, the fire is already built high, the flames bright and active, and the room is crowded with monks, some standing close to the hearth, others seated on the benches that line the walls, all of them silent but present, absorbing the warmth with a kind of reverence. You find a place near the wall and sit, and the heat finds you gradually, your face first, then your hands as you stretch them toward the fire, and the sensation is so acute it is almost painful, the cold in your flesh resisting the warmth, the two temperatures meeting in your skin and creating a third sensation entirely, neither comfortable nor uncomfortable but intensely vivid. Brother Thomas sits beside you, his face ruddy in the firelight, his hands extended like yours toward the flames. He does not look at you, the silence still holds here, even in this room of permitted comfort, but his presence is companionable, a reminder that this experience, this long negotiation with winter, is not solitary even when it feels most isolating. You sit together in the warmth, and around you the other monks do the same, and there is something in this gathering that feels essential, more essential perhaps than the warmth itself, though the warmth is necessary, is the reason you are here. The time in the warming room is limited, rationed like everything else in winter, and after perhaps 20 minutes Brother Benedict rises and moves toward the door, the signal that the period of warmth is ending, that the day's work must begin. The others rise as well, slowly, reluctant but obedient, and you stand with them and follow them back out into the cold, which feels even more intense now for the brief respite you have had from it. The sky outside has begun to lighten, though the sun has not yet appeared, and in this gray pre-dawn light you can see your breath more clearly, can see the breath of all the monks around you rising like small prayers into the winter air. You move with the others toward the refectory, where the first meal of the day will be taken, and as you walk you become aware of how hungry you are, how the cold itself seems to increase appetite, to make the body crave fuel with an urgency that is absent in warmer months. The refectory is another vast stone room, unheated except by the bodies gathered within it, and the long tables are already set with wooden bowls and cups, with loaves of dark bread and a large pot of pottage that steams faintly in the cold air. You take your place at the table and wait as Brother Ambrose, the reader for the week, climbs to the pulpit at the far end of the room and opens the large book that rests there. He begins to read in Latin, his voice clear and measured, as the servers move along the tables with the pot of pottage, ladling the thick mixture of peas and barley and herbs into each bowl. When your bowl is filled you pick up your spoon, worn smooth by decades of use, and begin to eat slowly, the food warm in your mouth and throat, spreading heat into your center in a way that feels miraculous, feels like a kind of alchemy. The pottage is simple but substantial, designed to sustain labor, to provide the body with what it needs to function in this environment. You eat it all, and then you tear pieces from the bread and dip them into the remaining liquid at the bottom of the bowl, and then you drink the cup of weak ale that has been poured for you, and by the time the meal is finished you feel restored in a way that goes beyond mere satiation, feel that you have taken something necessary into yourself, fuel for the hours ahead. Brother Ambrose finishes reading and closes the book, and the meal ends as it began, in silence, with only the soft sounds of benches moving and feet on stone as the community rises and disperses to the day's appointed tasks. Your work today is in the scriptorium, as it has been for most of this winter, and you feel a small warmth of anticipation at the thought, knowing that the scriptorium, with its southern exposure and its clustered bodies bent over desks, is one of the warmer spaces in the monastery, relatively speaking. You make your way there through corridors that are growing lighter now as dawn properly arrives, and when you enter the long room with its rows of slanted desks and its shelves of books and materials, you find several brothers already at their places, already beginning the slow careful work of copying. You move to your own desk, near the window, and sit on the stool that is too hard and too tall but which positions your body correctly for the work, and you arrange your materials with the deliberate care that this work requires: the parchment, scraped thin and smooth, the knife for corrections, the quills you have cut and cured yourself, the pots of ink that Brother Simeon makes in the small workshop adjacent to this room. The manuscript you are copying is a psalter, commissioned by a monastery in the valley 3 days' journey south, and you have been working on it for 6 weeks, moving through the text with a precision that has become, over the months, almost meditative. You pick up your quill, dip it in the black oak gall ink, and begin to write, the Latin words flowing from pen to parchment in the careful minuscule script that you have practiced for years, that has become so natural to you that your hand knows the shapes without conscious thought. The light from the window is thin but sufficient, and as the sun rises higher it strengthens, illuminating the page before you, catching in the black ink and making it gleam. You work slowly, forming each letter with attention, aware that this page will outlast you, will carry these words forward into centuries you will never see, will be read by eyes not yet born. There is something in this awareness that makes the work feel significant beyond its immediate difficulty, beyond the cold in your fingers and the ache in your shoulders and the way your breath sometimes fogs the parchment before you. Around you the other monks work in similar silence, the only sounds the scratch of quills on parchment, the occasional soft clearing of a throat, the creak of a stool as someone shifts position. Brother Martin sits 2 desks away, working on an elaborate gospel book, and you can see from the corner of your eye the bright colors he is applying with his finest brushes, vermilion and azure and gold leaf that catches the light like small flames. His work is more skilled than yours, requires years more training, but he began as you are beginning, with simple texts and black ink, building the patience and precision that illumination demands. The morning passes in this absorbed silence, and you find that despite the cold, which is constant, which never quite leaves your awareness, there is a contentment in this work, a sense of purpose that warms you from within in a way that fire cannot. You complete 2 pages, and then a third, and by the time the bell rings for terce you have made satisfying progress, have moved the work forward in a way that feels like a small victory against the inertia that winter encourages. You rise from your stool, your back stiff, your fingers cramped from gripping the quill, and you follow the others out of the scriptorium and back toward the church for the mid-morning office. The sun is fully up now, visible through the cloister windows, and though it provides light, it provides little warmth, hanging pale and distant in a sky that is the color of steel. The church service is brief, shorter than the night office, but sufficient to mark the passage of time, to punctuate the day with prayer, to remind you that the work you do is not merely labor but offering. After terce you return not to the scriptorium but to the chapter house, where the community gathers for the daily meeting. The chapter house is another unheated space, circular, with stone benches built into the walls and a lectern at the center. You take your place on the bench and wait as the abbot enters and stands at the lectern, his breath visible in the cold air, his face composed and serious. He begins with a reading from the rule, as he does each day, and today the passage concerns humility, the way a monk must consider himself the lowest of all, must embrace insignificance as a path to grace. His voice is calm and measured as he reads, and the words are familiar, have been familiar for years, but in this season they take on a particular resonance. The cold itself is a practice of humility, you think, a daily reminder of the body's weakness, of its dependency, of the way comfort and control are illusions that winter strips away. After the reading the abbot addresses practical matters, a section of roof in the dormitory that needs repair before the next storm, a delegation expected from the bishop next week, the allocation of the remaining stores of grain and dried fish. He speaks plainly about these things, about the calculations and compromises that winter requires, about the necessity of frugality and foresight. You listen and understand that what you experience as individual cold, as personal endurance, is also communal, is shared and managed at a level beyond your immediate awareness, that the abbot and the cellarer and the other officials of the monastery are engaged in a constant calculus of survival, measuring supplies against weeks remaining, balancing need against reserve. Then there is the reading of the martyrology, the recitation of saints whose feast days fall on this date, and the abbot's brief homily on one of them, a hermit who lived in the desert and endured heat as you endure cold, who transformed privation into prayer. The parallel is clear, perhaps too clear, but it offers something, a tradition of endurance, a lineage of those who have chosen difficulty as a path to something larger than comfort. The meeting ends and the community disperses again, some to the cloister for reading, others to various tasks, the kitchen, the infirmary, the workshops. You are assigned this afternoon to help Brother Cuthbert in the cellars, checking the stores, rotating the root vegetables to prevent rot, ensuring that the small hoard of apples laid by in straw is still sound. It is work you do not enjoy. The cellars are even colder than the rest of the monastery, dug deep into the earth where no light reaches and the air is damp and still, but it is necessary work, and you have learned not to resist what is necessary. You descend the narrow stone stairs that lead down into the earth, following Brother Cuthbert's broad back, and at the bottom he lights a lantern from the candle he has carried down, and the small flame illuminates a long low space with a vaulted ceiling and rows of shelves and barrels and baskets. The cold here is different from the cold above, heavier, more present, not flowing but settled, ancient. You can smell the earth, the damp stone, the faint sweetness of apples and the earthier scent of turnips and onions. Brother Cuthbert hands you a basket and gestures toward the apples, and you understand without words that you are to sort through them, removing any that show signs of spoilage, setting aside any that are questionable. You carry the basket to the shelf where the apples are stored in careful layers of straw and you begin the work, lifting each apple, turning it in your hands, checking for soft spots or discoloration, the early signs of rot that, if not caught, will spread and ruin the entire store. The work is slow and cold and tedious, but there is a meditative quality to it, a rhythm that emerges, lift, turn, examine, place, reach for the next. Your fingers grow numb after a time, and you have to pause periodically to blow on them, to rub them together, to restore enough sensation to do the work properly. Brother Cuthbert works nearby with the turnips, sorting and restacking, and occasionally he finds one that has begun to rot and he carries it to a bucket near the stairs, the smell of it sharp and unpleasant in the close air. You work together in silence for what might be 2 hours, though time is difficult to measure in this underground space where there is no sun, no bell, only the steady rhythm of the work itself. You find 3 apples that must be discarded, and perhaps a dozen more that are questionable but still edible, that will need to be used soon, and when you finish Brother Cuthbert nods his approval and gestures toward the stairs. You climb back up into the dim light of the ground floor, and the cold there feels almost warm by comparison, feels like a relief after the heavy chill of the cellar. The afternoon is advancing now, the light already beginning to fade though it is not yet none, and you make your way to the church again for the mid-afternoon office. Your body is tired in a way that feels cumulative, not just from today's work but from all the days behind it, weeks and weeks of cold and labor and insufficient sleep. But there is also a kind of strength in this tiredness, a knowledge that you can continue, that the body is more resilient than it appears, that it will carry you through this season as it has carried you through others. The office is sung, the psalms rising and falling in the familiar patterns, and you add your voice to the others and feel again that sense of the individual dissolving into the communal, the way these practices bind you to the men around you, make you part of something larger and older than your single life. When the office ends you move with the others toward the refectory for the second and final meal of the day, and you are aware again of deep hunger, of the body's insistence on fuel. The evening meal is similar to the morning one, bread, pottage, ale. But there is also a small portion of dried fish, salty and tough but rich with fat, and you eat it slowly, chewing thoroughly, extracting every bit of nourishment from it. Brother Ambrose reads again from the pulpit, a different text this time, the life of a saint, and his voice forms a backdrop to the eating, words entering your mind without demanding full attention, creating a kind of atmosphere, a sonic texture that makes the meal feel ceremonial rather than merely functional. When the meal ends, darkness has fully fallen, and there is a brief period of free time before Compline, the final office of the day. Some monks return to their cells to rest, others to the cloister to read by candlelight, but you find yourself drawn again to the warming room, where the fire has been rebuilt for the evening gathering. The room is full when you arrive, monks seated shoulder to shoulder on the benches, their faces lit by the flames, and you find a space near the back and sit, grateful for the warmth, for this second reprieve from the cold. Brother Thomas is here again, and Brother Anselm, and many others whose names you know, whose faces have become familiar over these months of shared endurance. No one speaks, the silence is maintained, but there is communication nonetheless in the way bodies arrange themselves, in the small gestures of consideration as someone shifts to make room, as someone stokes the fire to keep it bright. You sit and watch the flames and feel the warmth seep into you, and for this brief time you are not cold, are not uncomfortable, are simply present in this moment of grace that the community has created and maintained. Too soon the bell rings for Compline, and you rise with the others and process once more to the church, and the final office is sung in near darkness, only a few candles burning, the words a kind of closing, a sealing of the day. There is something in the Compline psalms that always moves you, a particular tone of relinquishment, of giving the day and the self over to God and to sleep, of acknowledging that you have done what you could and that what you could not do is also part of the pattern, is also held. After Compline the great silence begins, the silence that will last until morning, and the community disperses to the dormitory, to the cells, to sleep. You climb the night stairs slowly, your body heavy with fatigue, and in your cell you remove only your boots and your scapular before lying down on the thin mattress, pulling the blankets over you. The cold is immediate and total, and you lie in it knowing that sleep will come eventually, that the body will surrender to its need, that tomorrow will be another day much like this one, and the day after that, and the days after that, stretching forward into February, into March, until finally the season turns. You close your eyes and feel the cold against your face, and you think of the fire in the warming room, now banked for the night, glowing in the darkness, a small persistent heat at the center of all this stone and winter. You think of the other monks in their cells, lying as you are lying, cold as you are cold, enduring what you are enduring. You think of the psalms sung today, the words that have been sung here for centuries, that will be sung tomorrow, that will be sung long after you are gone. And in this thinking, in this awareness of continuity and community and purpose, you find a kind of warmth that is not physical but is nonetheless real, is perhaps more real than the warmth of fire, is the warmth of meaning, of a life shaped by something larger than comfort, larger than self. You drift toward sleep, and the cold recedes slightly, becomes background, becomes the condition within which you exist but not the whole of your existence. Your breath slows, your thoughts loosen and fragment, and the last thing you are aware of before sleep takes you is the sound of wind outside, moving through the valley, carrying the scent of snow, promising more cold, more winter, more days like this one. And it is enough. It has to be enough. It is what you have chosen, what you choose again each morning when you rise in the darkness, what you will choose tomorrow and the day after that. The cold is a teacher, you think, or the cold is a companion, or the cold is simply the truth of this season, this life, this path you have taken. And you accept it, not with joy perhaps but with something deeper than joy, something more durable, acceptance, endurance, the quiet victory of continuing. You wake before lauds, and the darkness around you feels absolute, pressing against your eyelids even after you open them. The cold has teeth tonight, real teeth, and you feel them sink into your feet first, then your fingers, then the tip of your nose. Brother Thomas is already awake. You hear the soft scrape of his sandals on stone as he moves through the darkness, finding his way by memory alone. You lie still for one more breath, gathering yourself, and in that breath you understand something you have been approaching for weeks. Winter is no longer coming. Winter is here. It has arrived fully, settled into every corner of the monastery like an uninvited guest who will not leave until spring breaks the seal. You rise, and the movement sends a shock of cold through your body that makes your chest tighten. The air tastes metallic, almost sharp enough to cut. You fumble for your outer tunic, the heavier one you set aside last night in preparation, and pull it over your head. The wool is stiff and cold against your skin, and it will take the heat of your body to soften it, to make it a shelter rather than a burden. You find your belt by touch, cinch it around your waist, and then reach for the extra cloth you have been keeping folded beneath your pallet, a strip of linen you now wind around your neck and tuck into your tunic. Small measures. Small defenses. But in winter, you have learned, survival is built from small things. The bell rings, and the sound seems muffled, as though the cold has thickened the air into something that resists even sound. You move toward the night stairs with the others, a silent procession of shadows. Your breath is visible now, even in the darkness, pale plumes that vanish almost as quickly as they appear. The stone steps are treacherous, ice has formed in the corners where condensation gathered during the day and froze when night fell. You place each foot with care, your hand trailing along the wall for balance. Someone ahead of you slips slightly, catches himself, continues. No one speaks. The rule of silence feels less like a rule now and more like a natural condition, as though the cold has stolen not just warmth but also the impulse to break the quiet. In the church, the candles have already been lit, and their light seems dimmer than usual, struggling against the vastness of the cold. You take your place in the choir stalls, and the wood beneath you feels like ice. The monks settle into position, and you watch their breath rise in collective clouds, a visible manifestation of the community's presence. Father Abbot begins the office, and his voice is steady, but you can hear the way the cold has entered even there, a slight tightness, a careful control. You join the chant, and the Latin syllables roll through your mouth and into the frozen air, each word a small act of defiance against the silence and the dark. The psalms feel different in deep winter. In autumn, they were meditations. Now they are lifelines. Out of the depths I cry to you, O Lord, and you understand depths differently now, the way cold can pull you down into a kind of interior abyss where warmth seems like a memory from another life. He gives snow like wool, he scatters frost like ashes, and you think of the frost you saw yesterday morning, crystalline and intricate on the inside of the windows, beautiful and merciless. The rhythm of the chant holds you, carries you, and you let yourself sink into it, using the music as a way to forget, for a moment, the ache in your toes and the stiffness in your fingers. When lauds ends, you do not return to the dormitory. There is no point, you would not sleep now, not with the cold pressing so close. Instead, you move with several other monks toward the kale factory, the warming room, the one space in the monastery where a fire is permitted to burn through the night. The room is small, too small for all of you at once, and so you have learned to take turns, to rotate through in groups, each monk allotted a brief window of warmth before yielding the space to others. It is a careful choreography, unspoken but universally understood, and it functions because it must. When you enter, the heat strikes you like a physical thing. The fire in the central hearth is well fed, banked carefully to last through the night, and the stones around it radiate warmth in waves that make your skin prickle. You move close, closer than you would dare in any other season, and hold your hands out toward the flames. The pain comes first, a sharp tingling as blood returns to your fingers, and then relief, slow and spreading. Around you, other monks do the same, their faces illuminated by the firelight, their expressions soft with something close to gratitude. No one speaks. This, too, is a kind of prayer. You stay as long as you are permitted, perhaps a quarter of an hour, and then you step back, making room for the next group. The warmth clings to you as you leave, a temporary gift, and you move through the corridors with it still wrapped around your shoulders like an invisible cloak. It will fade, you know. In 10 minutes, in 20, the cold will reclaim you. But for now, you carry the fire with you, and that is enough. Prime arrives, and then terse, and the day begins to establish itself in the slow, measured way of winter days. The light that filters through the windows is pale and thin, as though the sun itself is struggling to penetrate the cold. You attend each office in turn, and between them you work. Today you are assigned to the library, and you are grateful. The scriptorium is not warm, nowhere is truly warm, but it is better than the cloister walk, better than the garden, better than the outbuildings where wind finds every crack and seam. You settle at your desk, the one near the window where the light is best, and you draw your materials close. The manuscript you are copying is a gospel text, and the work requires precision, steadiness, a kind of interior stillness that matches the stillness of the winter world outside. You dip your quill into the ink, carefully, because ink thickens in cold and must be persuaded to flow, and you begin to form letters. Each stroke is deliberate. Each curve and line must be perfect, or as close to perfect as your cold-stiffened fingers can manage. The cold makes this work harder. Your hand wants to cramp. Your fingers want to curl inward, seeking their own warmth. But you have learned techniques over the weeks. You pause frequently, flexing your fingers, rubbing your hands together. You keep your inkpot close to a small oil lamp, using its faint heat to keep the ink from congealing. You work in short bursts, giving yourself permission to rest, knowing that slow, steady progress is better than rushed errors that will need to be scraped away and redone. Brother Clement works at the desk beside you, and occasionally you glance his way, watching the careful movements of his hand as he illuminates a capital letter with gold leaf and lapis lazuli. The colors seem impossibly bright against the gray winter light, as though he is painting warmth itself onto the vellum. He catches you looking and offers a small smile, brief and wordless, before returning to his work. The silence between you is comfortable, a shared understanding that needs no language. Hours pass. The light shifts, moving across the room in its slow winter arc, and you follow it, adjusting your position to make the most of its pale glow. Outside, you hear the wind pick up, a low moan that rattles the shutters and finds its way through the gaps in the window frames. The temperature drops further. You pull your sleeves down over your hands, leaving only your fingers exposed, and you continue writing. The words you copy are ancient, passed down through centuries, and as you form them you think about all the other hands that have written these same words in rooms like this one, in winters like this one, their fingers just as cold, their determination just as fierce. At Sext, you pause for the midday office, and then for the meal that follows. Today there is bread, as always, and a thick pottage made from dried peas and onions, flavored with a small amount of salted pork fat. The pottage is warm, blessedly warm, and you eat it slowly, spooning it into your mouth and letting the heat spread through your chest. Around you, the other monks eat in silence, and the only sounds are the scrape of spoons against bowls and the occasional cough or sniffle. Winter has brought illness with it, as it always does, colds that settle in the chest, fevers that come and go, aches that lodge in the joints and refuse to leave. Brother Anselm has been confined to the infirmary for 3 days now, and you have not seen him at the offices. You pray for him silently as you eat, hoping that the herbs and poultices the infirmarian prepares will be enough. After the meal, you are assigned to help Brother Martin in the root cellar. This is cold work, perhaps the coldest, because the cellar is underground and the chill there is a different kind, damp and penetrating, the kind that settles into your bones and lingers. But the work is necessary. The stores must be checked, rotated, monitored for spoilage. Winter makes no allowances for negligence. You descend the narrow stairs into the cellar's darkness, carrying a lamp that casts jumping shadows on the stone walls. Brother Martin is already there, moving among the bins and barrels, his breath visible in the lamplight. He nods to you, and together you begin the work. You check the apples first, sorting through them, removing any that have begun to soften or show signs of rot. One bad apple, Brother Martin has told you more than once, can ruin a dozen others. You work methodically, your hands numb within minutes, setting aside the good fruit, discarding the questionable. Next are the root vegetables, turnips, parsnips, carrots, stored in bins of sand to keep them from drying out. You sift through them, checking for sprouting or decay, and you marvel again at the planning that went into these stores, the labor of harvest that now sustains you. Each carrot, each turnip, represents a moment of summer warmth, and you handle them with a kind of reverence, knowing they are more precious now than gold. Brother Martin works with quiet efficiency, and you fall into rhythm beside him. He is an older monk, his hair fully gray, his hands gnarled but still strong. He has survived many winters, and there is a steadiness to him that you find comforting. He does not speak much, but occasionally he offers small observations. This batch of onions is holding well, or we should move the remaining cabbages to the upper bin. You listen, and you learn, and you understand that this knowledge is a kind of inheritance, passed from one generation of monks to the next, a living tradition of survival. When the work is finished, you climb back up into the daylight, and even the pale winter sun feels warm compared to the cellar's depths. Your hands are stiff, your back aches from bending, but there is satisfaction in the work, in knowing that the community's stores are sound, that you have done your part to ensure that everyone will eat tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after that. None arrives, and you return to the church. The office feels shorter in winter, or perhaps you have simply learned to endure the cold better, to let it wash over you without resistance. You chant the psalms, and the words are familiar now, worn smooth by repetition, and that smoothness is a comfort. After none, there is a brief period of rest, and you return to the dormitory, wrapping yourself in your blanket and lying still, not quite sleeping but not quite awake, hovering in a gray space where the cold feels distant and the silence is almost warm. Vespers comes as the light begins to fail. The church is darker now, the candles more necessary, their light more precious. You watch the shadows flicker on the walls, and you think about time, about how winter stretches it and compresses it simultaneously. Days feel long, each hour distinct and slow, and yet the season itself seems endless, as though you have always been cold and always will be. It is a paradox you do not try to resolve. You simply note it, hold it, let it exist alongside everything else you carry. The evening meal is simple, bread again, a little cheese, some dried fruit. There is no pottage tonight, the fire in the kitchen is banked early to conserve fuel. You eat slowly, chewing each bite thoroughly, extracting every bit of nourishment and warmth. The bread is hard, baked days ago, and you soften it in your mouth before swallowing. The cheese is sharp and crumbly, and the dried fruit, apples, sliced thin and leathery, is sweet in a way that feels almost extravagant. After Compline, the final office of the day, you do not go immediately to bed. Instead, you join a small group of monks in the cloister, walking slowly around the covered walkway in silent meditation. This is not required, but it is a practice some have adopted, a way to settle the body and mind before sleep. The air is frigid, sharp enough to make your eyes water, and the flagstones beneath your feet are slick with frost. You walk carefully, your hands tucked into your sleeves, your breath a constant cloud before your face. The cloister garden at the center of the walk is barren now, the beds empty except for a few dead stalks and the skeletal remains of summer herbs. Snow has begun to fall, small, dry flakes that drift through the air like ash, and you watch them settle on the frozen ground, building slowly into a thin white layer. There is a beauty to this, you think. A terrible, austere beauty that has nothing to do with comfort and everything to do with truth. Winter does not lie. It shows you the world as it is, hard, cold, indifferent. And in that showing, there is a kind of clarity. You complete 3 circuits of the cloister, and then you return to the dormitory. The other monks are already in their pallets, wrapped in their blankets, and the sound of breathing fills the room, steady, rhythmic, a collective lullaby. You undress quickly, shivering as you pull off your outer tunic and fold it at the foot of your pallet. You keep your under tunic on, and your hose, and you wrap the blanket tightly around yourself, cocooning your body against the cold. Sleep does not come quickly. It never does on the coldest nights. You lie awake, feeling the stone beneath you, the chill seeping up through the thin mattress, and you think about warmth. Not the roaring warmth of a great fire, but small warmths, the warmth of another person's presence, the warmth of sunlight on your face, the warmth of work that makes your muscles burn and your blood flow faster. You think about summer, about days when heat was something to escape rather than crave, and the memory seems distant, almost unreal. But you do not despair. Despair is a luxury you cannot afford. Instead, you breathe slowly, deliberately, and you turn your mind to prayer. Not formal prayer, not the structured Latin of the offices, but something simpler, more personal. A conversation with God that consists mostly of listening, of opening yourself to the silence and the cold and the darkness, trusting that even here, especially here, you are not alone. Eventually, sleep finds you. It is a shallow sleep, broken by the cold and by the sounds of the night, the wind, the occasional cough from another monk, the creak of wood settling in the freeze, but it is sleep nonetheless, and you are grateful for it. You wake again before matins, and the cycle begins anew. This is the rhythm of deep winter: wake, pray, work, eat, pray, work, pray, sleep. Over and over, day after day, each day nearly identical to the one before, and yet each day distinct in its small challenges, its small victories. You are tired, always tired now, and the cold is a constant companion, but you are also, in some strange way, content. You have learned that survival is not a grand heroic act but a series of small, deliberate choices: to rise when the bell rings, to work when your hands are numb, to eat slowly and gratefully, to pray even when the words feel empty, to trust that spring will come even when winter seems eternal. Brother Anselm returns from the infirmary on the 3rd day, pale and thin but walking, and the community receives him back with quiet nods and small smiles. No one says much, but the relief is palpable. One of your own has survived, has been restored to the fold, and that restoration feels like a promise: you will all endure. You will all make it through. The snow continues to fall, off and on, and the monastery grounds transform into a landscape of white and gray, the colors leached out, the world reduced to essentials. The paths are cleared each morning, a task that falls to rotating teams of monks, and you take your turn with the shovel, lifting and throwing snow, feeling your body warm with the effort despite the cold air. The work is hard, but it is also satisfying, immediate, tangible, necessary. You clear a path, and others can walk safely. You clear the steps, and someone does not fall. Small acts. Small graces. In the scriptorium, your manuscript progresses. Page by page, letter by letter, you copy the gospel text, and the work becomes a meditation in itself. You think about the words you are writing, about their meaning, about the hands that first wrote them and the voices that first spoke them. You think about transmission, about how knowledge and faith are passed through time, fragile as vellum, enduring as stone. The cold makes the work difficult, but it also makes it precious. Every page completed feels like a small miracle. Brother Clement finishes his illuminated capital, and he shows it to you with shy pride. The gold leaf catches the lamplight and glows, warm and alive, and the blue of the lapis is deep as summer sky. You tell him it is beautiful, and he smiles, and for a moment the scriptorium feels less cold, heated by the quiet satisfaction of work done well. The days shorten further as winter deepens, and the offices are now conducted almost entirely in darkness, the church lit only by candles and lamps. The light has a different quality in this season, softer, more intimate, as though the darkness is not an absence but a presence, something that holds you and the community together. You learn to navigate by feel, by memory, your feet finding the familiar paths without thought, your body knowing where to turn, where to pause, where to kneel. Father Abbot gives a chapter talk on the virtue of perseverance, and his words are simple but penetrating. He speaks about the winter of the soul, about seasons of dryness and difficulty, about the importance of continuing even when continuation feels pointless. He does not offer easy comfort. He does not promise that winter will be short or that spring will come soon. He simply reminds you that this, too, is part of the life you have chosen, that hardship and holiness are not opposites but companions, that God is present in the cold as much as in the warmth. You listen, and you feel the truth of his words settle into you, not as consolation but as challenge. That night, in the kale factory, you sit closer to the fire than usual, taking your allotted time and using it fully. The warmth penetrates deep, and you close your eyes, letting yourself feel it completely, storing it up like the monk stored grain and apples, something to draw on later when the cold returns. Around you, other monks do the same, and the room is silent except for the crackle of the fire and the soft sounds of breathing. It is a moment of communion, wordless and profound, a shared recognition that you are all in this together, all struggling, all enduring, all holding on. When you leave the kale factory, the cold hits you like a blow, but you are ready for it now. You walk back to the dormitory with steady steps, and you do not hurry. You have learned that rushing does not make you warmer, that the cold will find you no matter how fast you move. Better to walk with dignity, with presence, to inhabit each moment fully rather than trying to escape it. In your pallet, wrapped in your blanket, you think about the weeks ahead. January is perhaps the hardest month, the deepest part of winter, when the cold is most entrenched and the memory of warmth most distant. But you also know that every day now is a day closer to spring, that the wheel is turning even when you cannot see it move, that beneath the frozen ground seeds are waiting, dormant but alive, ready to rise when the time comes. You think about Brother Anselm, returned from illness. You think about Brother Clement's illumination, glowing gold in the gray light. You think about the cleared paths, the sound stores, the steady rhythm of the offices. You think about all the small ways the community sustains itself, all the small acts of care and attention that accumulate into survival. And you understand, with a clarity that feels almost like revelation, that this is what winter teaches, not strength, not heroism, but endurance. Not the ability to conquer the cold, but the willingness to live within it, to make a life that is not defined by comfort but by continuity, by faithfulness, by the stubborn, quiet decision to continue. The bell will ring soon. Matins will begin. You will rise, and you will pray, and you will do the work that is set before you. And tomorrow you will do it again. And the day after that. And the day after that. Until the season turns, until the ice melts, until the first green shoots appear in the garden and remind you that nothing, not winter, not cold, not darkness, lasts forever. But tonight, you do not think about spring. You think about now. About this breath, this moment, this small space of warmth you have created beneath your blanket. You close your eyes. You let the cold and the darkness hold you. And you sleep. The snow has been falling for 3 days now, and you stand at the narrow window of your cell, watching the courtyard below slowly vanish beneath a white mantle that seems to erase all distinction between earth and sky. The stone beneath your fingertips holds a cold so profound it feels almost alive, pulsing with the ancient memory of glaciers and frozen seas. You pull your hand back and tuck it beneath your scapular, pressing it against the wool that covers your ribs, feeling your own warmth slowly seep back into the numbed fingers. This is the heart of winter now, the season you have been preparing for since the first leaves turned copper in the orchard. The provisions you helped preserve in late summer sit secure in the cellar. The wood you split and stacked through autumn stands ready against the refectory wall. The thick woolen stockings you mended by candlelight protect your feet from the cold that rises through the stone floor like water seeping through a hull. Everything has led to this moment, this testing, this deep winter that will ask everything of you and give nothing back except the chance to endure, to continue, to wake each morning to the sound of the bell and rise again into the cold and the prayers and the work that never ceases. You turn from the window and move toward the door of your cell, feeling the shift in air temperature as you leave the small space where your body heat has gathered, however faintly, and step into the corridor. Here the cold is sharper, less forgiving. The vaulted ceiling draws what little warmth there might be upward and away, leaving the air at shoulder height perpetually frigid. Your breath plumes before you as you walk, each exhalation a small ghost that dissipates almost instantly in the drafts that move through the monastery like invisible tides. The corridor stretches before you, lit by the gray winter light that filters through the high windows, and you can see other brothers moving toward the church for sext, the midday office. Their forms are bulky with layers, each man wrapped in whatever warmth the community can provide, woolen robes, patched cloaks, hoods drawn up against the cold. You fall into step behind Brother Thomas, whose limp has grown more pronounced as the winter deepened, the old injury in his hip made brittle by the cold. He moves slowly, carefully, and you match your pace to his without speaking, your presence a silent offer of companionship on this short but difficult journey from the dormitory to the church. The church doors stand open, and as you pass through them you feel the temperature drop even further. The vast space of the nave cannot be heated, not even with all the bodies gathered here, and the stone walls and pillars seem to radiate cold from their very substance, as though they have stored up all the winter darkness and now release it slowly, inexorably, into the air you must breathe and inhabit. You take your place in the choir stalls, settling onto the wooden seat that is so cold it burns even through the layers of fabric between your flesh and the oak. Around you, the community gathers, each brother finding his accustomed place, and the familiar arrangement brings a comfort that has nothing to do with physical warmth and everything to do with belonging, with being part of a pattern that has repeated itself here for generations. The abbot enters, and you rise with the others, feeling the stiffness in your knees and back, the way the cold has crept into your joints during the hours since you last moved. The office begins, and your voice joins the others in the ancient words, the Latin syllables flowing out into the frigid air and rising toward the vaulted ceiling where they seem to hang suspended, visible almost, in the dim light that falls through the clerestory windows. You have sung these same prayers every day since you arrived here as a young novice, and the words no longer require conscious thought, they flow through you like breath, like blood, an expression of something deeper than intellect, something rooted in the body's own rhythm and the soul's persistent turning toward the divine. As you chant, you become aware of the sounds beyond the words themselves, the shuffle of feet on stone, the muted coughs that interrupt the flow of prayer as winter illness moves through the community, the creak of wood as someone shifts weight, seeking relief from the cold or from old aches that winter has awakened. These sounds are as much a part of the office as the prayers themselves, a reminder that you are not disembodied spirits singing in some ethereal realm but flesh and blood men struggling to hold fast to your commitments in the face of very real physical hardship. The office concludes, and you file out with the others toward the refectory, where the midday meal awaits. The refectory is marginally warmer than the church, thanks to the kitchen that adjoins it and the brazier that burns at one end of the hall, though its heat reaches only those sitting nearest, and you are not among them. You take your place at one of the long tables, sitting on the bench between Brother Ambrose and young Brother Peter, whose presence beside you is welcome because his youth makes him burn slightly warmer than the older men, a small heat source you can feel even without touching him. The meal is set before you, a thick pottage of dried peas and barley, flavored with onions and herbs from the stores, and a piece of dark bread still warm from the oven. There is also a small cup of warmed ale, not enough to intoxicate but enough to bring a brief flush of warmth to your chest and belly. You eat slowly, savoring not just the taste but the heat of the food, the way it travels down your throat and spreads through your core, pushing back the cold for these few precious minutes. Around you, the others eat in silence, as the rule requires, while Brother Vincent reads aloud from the lives of the Desert Fathers, his voice steady and clear in the quiet hall. You listen to the reading while you eat, hearing again the familiar stories of those ancient monks who lived in caves and huts in the Egyptian wilderness, enduring heat instead of cold, their own form of physical trial. You have always found a strange comfort in these stories, knowing that the struggle to remain faithful, to hold fast to prayer and work in community, is not unique to this place or this time but is something that has been faced by every generation of monks, whether in burning deserts or frozen northern lands. The details differ, but the essential challenge remains the same: to say yes to this life, over and over, in the face of discomfort, doubt, boredom, pain. When the meal ends, you make your way to the warming room, the one space in the monastery where a fire burns throughout the winter, though even here the warmth is rationed, the fire kept small and carefully tended to conserve the wood that must last until spring. The room is crowded, brothers standing shoulder to shoulder around the hearth, holding their hands toward the flames, turning slowly to warm first one side and then the other. You wait your turn at the edge of the room, watching the firelight play across the worn faces of the men who have been here longer than you, men who have endured dozens of these winters and will endure more, God willing, before they are finally laid to rest in the small cemetery beyond the orchard wall. When space opens near the fire, you move forward and extend your hands toward the heat, feeling the sting as blood returns to your fingers, the painful prickling that is somehow both agony and relief. You stand there for the prescribed time, not long, for others are waiting, and let the warmth soak into your palms, your wrists, the bones of your forearms. This heat will fade as soon as you step away, you know, but for now it is enough, this small gift of comfort in the midst of winter's trial. You leave the warming room and make your way to the scriptorium, where you have work waiting. The afternoon hours are given to labor, and yours is the copying of manuscripts, the patient transfer of sacred texts from one page to another. The scriptorium is cold, colder perhaps than anywhere except the church itself, because the high windows that provide light also let in drafts that seem to find every gap in your clothing. You settle at your desk, wrapping a blanket around your shoulders and pulling fingerless gloves onto your hands, leaving your fingers exposed so you can hold the quill but protecting your palms and wrists from the worst of the cold. The manuscript before you is a gospel book, the words of Matthew rendered in careful Latin script, each line a meditation, each letter a prayer. You prepare your ink, warming it briefly over a small heated stone to keep it from thickening too much in the cold, and then you dip your quill and begin to write. The work requires absolute focus, not just because errors are costly, parchment is precious and cannot be wasted, but because the cold makes your hands clumsy, your fingers stiff and slow to respond. You must concentrate on each stroke, each curve and line, fighting the tendency to rush, to finish quickly and escape back to the relative warmth of the warming room. As you work, you become aware of the other scribes around you, each man bent over his own desk, engaged in his own silent dialogue with ink and parchment and the words that have been passed down through centuries. Brother Michael, who sits across from you, is illuminating a psalter, adding gold leaf and brilliant pigments to the capital letters, transforming them into windows of beauty that seem to hold light even in this dim winter afternoon. His breath plumes in the cold air, and you can see his hands trembling slightly as he works, the fine brush requiring steadiness that the cold makes difficult to maintain. Still, he persists, his devotion to beauty a form of prayer as valid as any word spoken in the choir. The afternoon wears on, and the light begins to fade. You know you have perhaps another hour before Vespers, another hour to add lines to the page before you must set aside the work and return to the church for the evening office. Your back aches from sitting hunched over the desk, and your feet have gone numb despite the extra stockings. You pause to flex your fingers, to blow warm breath across them, and in that pause you look out the window at the world beyond the scriptorium walls. The snow has stopped falling, and the sky is clearing to reveal patches of pale winter blue. The light that comes through those breaks in the clouds is thin and cold, but it holds a clarity that summer light never possesses, a sharpness that makes every edge and line stand out with almost painful precision. You can see the monastery church across the cloister, its stone walls gray against the white snow, and above it the wooden cross that marks the building as a house of prayer. That cross stands dark against the clearing sky, and you find your eyes drawn to it, held by it, as you have been held so many times before when the work grows difficult and the cold seems unbearable. You return to your work, letting the image of the cross sink into the background of your awareness while your conscious attention focuses again on the letters forming beneath your quill. There is a rhythm to this work, a cadence that mirrors the rhythm of the offices, the rhythm of the seasons, the great rhythm of waking and sleeping that underlies all human life. You let yourself fall into that rhythm, let it carry you forward through the remaining pages, through the final hour before the bell rings for Vespers. When the bell does ring, you set down your quill with relief and gratitude, capping your ink carefully and covering the manuscript to protect it from dust and drafts overnight. You unwrap the blanket from your shoulders and fold it neatly on the bench, then make your way out of the scriptorium and back across the cloister toward the church. The cold hits you with renewed force after the hours sitting still, and you have to will your legs to move, to carry you steadily across the courtyard where the snow lies smooth and unmarked except for the paths worn by the brothers' constant passage. The church is darker now, the winter evening coming on fast, and candles have been lit in the choir, their flames small points of gold in the gathering dimness. You take your place again in the stalls, and as the office begins you feel a shift in your awareness, a settling, as though you are finally arriving at the center of the day, the point toward which all the morning and afternoon have been moving. The prayers of Vespers speak of evening and rest, of the day's work laid down and the night's vigil about to begin, and as you sing them you feel your body beginning to acknowledge its exhaustion, the accumulated weariness of this day and all the days before it, the ongoing challenge of winter that wears you down with such patient, inexorable pressure. After Vespers comes supper, a lighter meal than the midday dinner, bread and cheese, dried fruit, another cup of warmed ale. You eat quickly, feeling the need for rest more than the need for food, and when the meal ends you make your way not to the warming room but directly to the dormitory, climbing the stairs slowly, each step an effort. The dormitory is dark except for the single candle that burns in a niche at the far end, and cold enough that you can see your breath even here, in this enclosed space where 40 men will spend the night. You enter your cell and close the door behind you, leaning against it for a moment, feeling the privacy, the solitude, the brief respite from the constant presence of others. Your cell is small and bare, a narrow bed, a wooden stool, a shelf that holds your few possessions. The window is shuttered against the night, but you can hear the wind beginning to rise outside, a low moan that speaks of more cold to come, perhaps more snow before morning. You light the small candle on the shelf, and its flame pushes back the darkness just enough to make the space feel less desolate, less austere. You sit on the edge of the bed and remove your boots, feeling the relief as your feet are released from their confines, even though the cold immediately attacks your thin stockings. You rub your feet briefly, trying to restore circulation, and then you pull on the extra woolen socks you save for sleeping, thick and somewhat misshapen from many washings but warm, or at least warmer than the alternative. You remove your outer robe and hang it on the peg by the door, then lie down on the bed, pulling the thin blanket and your cloak over yourself, layering them for maximum warmth. The bed is hard and the blankets inadequate, but you have grown accustomed to both over the years. You lie on your back and look up at the dark ceiling, listening to the sounds of the monastery settling into night, footsteps in the corridor, muted coughs and sneezes, the wind buffeting the shutters, the distant creak of wood contracting in the cold. These sounds are familiar, a lullaby of sorts, and you feel yourself beginning to drift, your body claiming the rest it has earned through the day's labor. But before sleep takes you, you pray. Not the formal prayers of the office but your own words, or rather the wordless turning of your heart toward God that has become your private practice in these moments between waking and sleep. You pray for strength to continue, for patience with the cold and the discomfort, for charity toward your brothers, for faithfulness to the vows you made so long ago. You pray for those beyond the monastery walls, for the villagers who depend on the monastery's prayers and charity, for travelers caught in the winter storms, for the poor and the sick who suffer in ways you can barely imagine. And you pray in thanksgiving, for this day of life, for the food you ate and the work you accomplished, for the community that surrounds you and the roof that shelters you from the worst of winter's fury. Sleep comes quietly, without announcement, and you drift into it still praying, the boundary between waking and sleeping, between prayer and dreams, dissolving like snow melting into water, one state flowing into the other without clear division. You wake to the bell for vigils, the night office that begins in the darkest hours, and for a moment you cannot remember where you are or what season holds you. Then the cold rushes in, awareness returning, and you remember everything: the monastery, the winter, the life you have chosen. You sit up, moving slowly, feeling the stiffness in your joints, and reach for your outer robe in the darkness, pulling it on over your sleeping tunic, layering warmth against the night. The corridor is black except for the candles held by the brothers already moving toward the church, small flames bobbing in the darkness like fireflies in summer, though summer seems impossibly distant now, a dream from another lifetime. You take your own candle from the shelf and light it from the flame in the corridor, then join the procession, walking carefully in the uncertain light, following the brother ahead of you down the stairs and across the cloister. The church at night is transformed, mysterious, the darkness gathering in the high vaults and the candlelight insufficient to dispel it, only pushing it back into the corners and the spaces between the pillars. You take your place in the choir and wait as the community assembles, each man appearing out of the darkness, taking his accustomed place, until finally all are present and the abbot begins the office. The prayers of vigils are long, the longest of the day, consisting of psalms and readings that stretch for more than an hour. In summer this office is a gift, a peaceful interlude in the warm darkness, but in winter it is an ordeal, a test of endurance as you stand and sit and stand again in the bone-deep cold, fighting sleep and shivering, keeping your voice steady as you chant the psalms that speak of God's faithfulness through the night watches. Your candle flame wavers in the drafts, and you cup your hand around it protectively, knowing that if it goes out you will have to stand the remainder of the office in complete darkness. Around you, the other brothers chant, their voices weaving together in the ancient melodies that have been sung in this place for centuries, voices that blend and separate, rise and fall, creating a fabric of sound that seems to have weight and texture, something you could almost reach out and touch. You add your voice to theirs, and in the singing you find a warmth that has nothing to do with the body, a heat that kindles somewhere deeper than flesh, in the place where faith lives and persists despite all discomfort, all doubt. The office finally ends, and you return to your cell for the brief remaining hours of sleep before lauds, the morning office, and the beginning of another day. You blow out your candle and lie down again, pulling the blankets close, and this time sleep takes you instantly, completely, a dark pool into which you sink without resistance. The days that follow repeat this pattern, each one a variation on the same essential theme: cold, prayer, work, brief moments of warmth, and the ongoing challenge of persisting, of choosing this life again and again in the face of winter's relentless pressure. There are small incidents that break the monotony. A brother falls ill and must be tended in the infirmary, a messenger arrives from a neighboring monastery with news and letters, a fox is spotted in the orchard, its red coat bright against the snow, but mostly the days flow into one another, distinguished only by the slow movement of the liturgical calendar through Epiphany and toward Candlemas. You grow thinner as winter progresses, as all the brothers do, the stored provisions always just slightly insufficient for the needs of 40 men through the long winter months. The rationing is careful but unavoidable, and you feel the constant low-level hunger as a background presence, not acute but persistent, another form of discomfort to be accepted and offered up. The rule speaks of moderation, of having enough but not excess, and winter makes the teaching concrete in ways that summer never does. Your work in the scriptorium continues, the manuscript pages slowly accumulating as you transfer the Gospel of Matthew from one book to another, word by word, line by line. Some days the cold is so severe that you can barely hold the quill, your fingers refusing to curve around it properly, and on those days you work even more slowly than usual, each letter requiring conscious effort. But you persist, knowing that this work is not just about producing books but about cultivating patience, steadiness, the ability to continue doing the small necessary things even when they seem impossibly difficult. Brother Michael finishes the illumination of his psalter and begins another, this one commissioned by a noble family in the valley below. The commission means income for the monastery, funds that will purchase grain and oil and other necessities, and so the work is important beyond its spiritual dimension. You watch him as he works, marveling at his ability to create beauty in such harsh conditions, his thin fingers coaxing brilliant blues and reds and golds from the pigments despite the cold that should make such delicate work impossible. He catches you watching once and offers a small smile, his eyes crinkling above his scarf, and you smile back, warmed by the brief connection, the wordless acknowledgement of shared struggle. The winter storms come and go, some lasting days, burying the monastery in snow that must be shoveled from the paths and roofs, others passing quickly, dropping only a dusting before moving on. After each storm, the world outside the monastery walls looks newly created, pristine and unmarked, and you find yourself drawn to the windows during the brief free moments, looking out at the white hills and the gray sky and the stark black lines of the leafless trees in the orchard. There is a beauty in this winter landscape that speaks to something deep in your soul, a beauty that has nothing to do with comfort or ease but rather with endurance, with the stubborn persistence of life in the face of death's cold grip. The Feast of Candlemas arrives in early February, marking the presentation of Christ in the temple and the midpoint of winter. The liturgy for this feast involves the blessing of candles, and the church is filled with their light, a warmth and brightness that feels almost extravagant after the weeks of dimness and darkness. You hold your candle during the procession, watching its flame burn steady and bright, and you think about light as a metaphor for faith, for hope, for the persistence of goodness in a world that often seems dark and cold. The candle will burn down and go out, but for now it burns, and that present burning is enough. After Candlemas, you begin to sense a shift, subtle at first but gradually becoming more pronounced. The days are lengthening, the sun rising a few minutes earlier each morning and setting a few minutes later each evening. The cold remains fierce, the snow still deep on the ground, but somewhere beneath the frozen surface you can feel the first stirring of life, the beginning of spring's slow movement toward birth and renewal. It will be weeks yet before the thaw comes, longer still before the first green shoots appear in the earth, but the turning point has been reached, and now you are moving toward warmth rather than away from it. This knowledge brings a subtle shift in the community's mood, a lightening of spirit that manifests in small ways, a joke shared in the warming room, a smile during the midday meal, a brother humming quietly as he works. The winter is not over, but its worst is behind you, and you have survived it, all of you together, through prayer and work and mutual support. Your manuscript is nearing completion, the Gospel of Matthew almost entirely transferred to its new pages. You work with renewed energy now, sensing the approach of spring and wanting to finish this labor before the season changes and new duties call you away from the scriptorium. The words flow from your quill more easily now, as though they too sense the coming warmth and are eager to be fixed on the page, preserved and passed on to future readers who will open this book and find in it the same eternal truths that you have been transcribing all these long winter weeks. One afternoon in late February, you look up from your work and see through the window a sight that makes your heart lift, a small bird, dark against the snow, hopping along the cloister wall. It is the first bird you have seen in weeks, most having fled south before the worst of winter arrived, and its presence feels like a promise, a messenger announcing that the world is still alive, still turning, still moving through its appointed cycles despite the cold that seems as though it will never end. You set down your quill and watch the bird for a long moment, this small creature whose survival is even more precarious than your own, and you feel a kinship with it, a recognition of shared vulnerability and shared tenacity. The bird finds something in the snow, a seed perhaps or a frozen insect, and then it spreads its wings and flies away, disappearing over the wall, and you return to your work with a feeling you had almost forgotten, hope. The winter continues, as winter must, but you continue with it, rising each morning to the bell, praying the offices, eating the simple meals, working through the cold afternoons, sleeping in your frigid cell, and waking to do it all again. The pattern has become so deeply ingrained that you no longer think about it consciously, it simply is, the framework within which your life unfolds, the structure that holds you and shapes you and makes you into the person you are becoming. And through it all, through the cold and the hunger and the discomfort, you are aware of something else, something that cannot be adequately captured in words but which you know with absolute certainty, that this life, hard as it is the life you were meant to live. That in choosing to remain here, in this stone monastery in the depths of winter, you are choosing something essential, something true. That the suffering has meaning, not because it earns you anything or proves anything, but simply because it is part of the pattern, part of the great cycle of seasons and the greater cycle of life and death and the hope of resurrection. The snow falls. The wind blows. The cold persists. And you persist with it, patient and faithful, waiting for spring. You wake in the deep hours before matins and the cell is still wrapped in darkness, but something has shifted in the quality of the cold. The stone beneath your palm no longer pulls warmth from your skin with quite the same hunger. You lie still for a moment, listening to the silence between your breaths, and you realize that the wind has changed. For weeks, months, perhaps, the northern gales have hurled themselves against the monastery walls with a fury that seemed eternal, but now the air beyond the narrow window holds a different voice. Softer. Almost questioning. You rise slowly, drawing the wool blanket around your shoulders, and you stand at the aperture looking out into the last of winter's domain. The stars are fading into a sky that carries the faintest suggestion of violet along its eastern hem. The snow that buried the courtyard in drifts taller than a man has begun to settle, to compact under its own weight, and in places you can see the dark stone of the pathways emerging like old bones breaking the surface of memory. The world is still locked in cold, still held in the grip of a season that has tested every aspect of your resolve, but there is a whisper now of something beyond. Not spring, not yet, that would be months away still, but the idea of spring, the promise written in the turning of the earth beneath the frozen ground. You breathe the night air and it no longer cuts quite so deeply into your lungs. You taste stone and ice and the old smoke of countless fires, but beneath it all, beneath the layered sense of survival and endurance, there is something else. Something green and patient, waiting. Brother Thomas rings the bell for matins and the sound travels through corridors that seem less hostile now, less determined to swallow warmth and light. You move through the familiar motions, the rough wool of your habits settling over your shoulders, the cord at your waist tied with fingers that remember the task even in darkness, the careful descent of the stairs where ice has made footing treacherous for so long. The others emerge from their cells like shadows gaining substance, and you see in their faces the same quiet recognition. The winter has not ended, but it has begun to loosen its hold. In the church, the candles seem to burn a fraction brighter, or perhaps your eyes have simply grown so accustomed to dimness that any light feels like abundance. The office unfolds with the rhythm you have carried through all the dark months, your voice joining the others in psalms that have become as familiar as your own heartbeat. But this morning there is a subtle shift in the harmonies, a slight lifting of the communal spirit that speaks of relief not yet fully acknowledged. Brother Martin's voice, which had grown thin and strained through the coldest weeks, carries more strength now. Prior Benedict stands at his place with shoulders that seem less burdened, though his face remains composed in the same expression of patient authority. Even old Brother Samuel, who had seemed to shrink into himself as winter deepened, lifts his head a fraction higher as he intones the responses. When the office concludes and you file out into the cloister, the darkness is giving way to that peculiar half-light that precedes true dawn. The covered walkway protects you from the worst of the cold, but you can see your breath still, white plumes that hang in the air for a moment before dissipating. Brother William walks beside you, his hands tucked into his sleeves, and he glances toward the courtyard where the snow has begun to reveal its secrets, the shapes of buried benches, the outline of the well, the dark lines where paths will eventually reappear. He says nothing, but you see in his eyes the same cautious hope that sits in your own chest, waiting to be tested. The days that follow carry this new quality, this sense of incremental change that requires patience to perceive. The sun, when it appears, still offers more light than warmth, but it climbs a fraction higher each day, and its pale rays reach corners of the monastery that have been in shadow since autumn. In the scriptorium, Brother Edmund allows the shutters to be open for longer periods, and the natural light that enters is no longer quite so grudging. You work at your copying with fingers that gradually, almost imperceptibly, begin to remember what it feels like to bend without pain. The ink flows more smoothly as the air in the chamber loses its most bitter edge. The words you inscribe, ancient wisdom, sacred texts, the accumulated knowledge of centuries, seem to carry their own quiet affirmation of continuity. Winter comes, winter tests, winter passes. The cycle holds. Brother Paul's cough, which had rasped through the dormitory for weeks, begins to ease. You see him in the infirmary one morning when you bring herbs from the storage room, and his face has lost the gray cast that had worried everyone. Brother Anselm works beside him, grinding something in a mortar with steady, patient movements, and when he looks up at you there is satisfaction in his expression. Not pride, exactly, that would be inappropriate, but the quiet recognition of small victories earned through careful attention and stubborn refusal to yield to despair. The monk who had burned with fever through the worst of January is sitting up now, taking thin broth, responding to questions. Life persisting. Life insisting. In the kitchen, Brother Gregory begins to speak of the gardens, of what will need to be done when the ground softens enough to work. It is far too early for planting, far too early even for the frost to break, but the very act of planting feels like an assertion of faith. You listen as he describes the rotation of crops, the mending of fences that winter storms have damaged, the clearing of beds where last year's growth lies frozen and dormant. His words paint pictures of green abundance over the white wasteland beyond the walls, and though part of your mind knows that months of cold still lie between present and future, another part welcomes the vision. You have learned, through these dark months, that survival requires both acceptance of current hardship and trust in eventual change. The communal meals take on a slightly different character. The food remains simple, portions remain measured, the stores must still be carefully managed through late winter and early spring, the leanest time, but there is more conversation, more instances of quiet laughter, more willingness to lift eyes from bowls and acknowledge the presence of others. Brother Thomas tells a story from his childhood, something about a winter that seemed endless until one morning his mother found snowdrops blooming against the wall of their cottage. The flowers had pushed up through snow and frozen earth, white bells nodding in the wind, absurd and perfect and utterly determined. The table falls quiet as he speaks, and you can see each man present searching his own memory for similar moments, small miracles of persistence that testify to the world's refusal to remain frozen forever. You think of your own childhood winters, though they seem distant now, separated from you by years of monastic routine and intentional simplification. You remember being a boy watching ice form in geometric patterns on a window, fascinated by the delicate architecture of frost. You remember the weight of wet wool after playing in snow, the sting of cold on exposed skin, the extraordinary pleasure of warmth after being chilled. These memories feel both foreign and intimately familiar, as though they belong to someone you once knew very well but have not spoken with in a long time. The monastery has shaped you into someone different, someone for whom winter is not an interruption of normal life but an integral part of the pattern, a season to be entered fully and endured with purpose. Yet that boy still exists somewhere in the layers of who you have become, and he stirs now, sensing change in the air. During the hours set aside for Lectio Divina, you find yourself returning again and again to passages about light and darkness, death and resurrection, the cycling of seasons as metaphor for spiritual transformation. The words on the page before you, copied by some long-dead monk in a scriptorium perhaps much like the one where you now work, speak of winter as a necessary passage, a time of apparent death that conceals and protects the life that will emerge. You read slowly, your lips forming the Latin words in silence, and you feel the meaning settle into your bones with a weight that is different from intellectual understanding. You have lived this winter, not merely observed it or thought about it. You have felt cold penetrate to your core and remain there, a constant presence. You have known hunger of a kind that never quite reaches starvation but never fully releases its grip either. You have watched brothers sicken and worried they might not recover. You have questioned, in the deep hours of bitter nights, whether spring would ever truly return or whether the world might simply remain locked in ice. And yet here you are. Here you all are. The community has held. The rule has sustained. The rhythm of prayer and work and measured living has carried you through to the threshold of another season. The monastery itself, this structure of stone and timber and faith, has sheltered you through another winter as it has sheltered countless monks through countless winters before. When you place your palm against the wall of the church, the stone is still cold, still holds the chill of months of freezing air, but you can sense the patience in it, the absolute confidence of stone that has stood through centuries of seasons. It will warm again. The cycle promises this. Your faith affirms this. And your experience, limited as it is to the few winters you have known within these walls, testifies to this. The offices continue their eternal rotation, pulling the community again and again into the church to stand in the presence of something larger than individual struggle. You chant the psalms that speak of God's faithfulness through all generations, through all seasons, through all circumstances. You listen to readings that recount the history of a people carried through wilderness, sustained through exile, brought through death into new life. The metaphors are not subtle, they were never meant to be, but their lack of subtlety does not diminish their power. You need these images, these promises, these ancient assurances. In the middle of winter's grip, even as that grip begins to ease, you need to be reminded that this is not the first darkness and will not be the last, that others have endured and emerged, that the pattern holds even when individual experience makes it seem doubtful. Brother Martin delivers a homily during the midday office on the feast of a saint you had not heard of before entering the monastery. The saint in question lived in the far north, in a land of ice and snow, and founded a community in conditions even harsher than what you have known. Brother Martin's voice is steady as he recounts the difficulties faced: starvation, cold so intense that men lost fingers and toes, isolation so complete that years might pass without contact with the outside world. And yet the community endured. It grew. It became a center of learning and prayer that lasted centuries. Brother Martin does not draw explicit parallels to your own situation, he does not need to, but every man present understands the sermon's core message. What you have endured is part of a tradition of endurance. Your winter is one winter in an unbroken chain of winters faced and survived by men and women who chose this life, who accepted its hardships as the price of its particular forms of freedom and meaning. In the afternoon, you find yourself assigned to work in the wood store, sorting and stacking logs in preparation for the loads that will need to be carried to various hearths before nightfall. The work is physical, repetitive, and surprisingly satisfying. Each piece of wood you handle represents hours of labor: the felling of the tree, the cutting into manageable lengths, the splitting, the drying, the careful storage. Each piece is potential warmth, potential light, potential comfort against the darkness. You stack oak with oak, beech with beech, maintaining the order that makes the store functional. Brother John works beside you, and the two of you develop a wordless rhythm, passing logs, adjusting the stack, moving with the efficiency that comes from shared purpose rather than explicit coordination. The light slanting through the gaps in the walls has a different quality today, less blue, more golden, as though the sun itself is beginning to remember warmth even if it cannot yet deliver it fully. Dust motes drift in the shafts of illumination, and you watch them for a moment, struck by the simple beauty of light made visible by dust. Brother John notices your pause and glances up, following your gaze. He says nothing, but his slight nod acknowledges that he sees it too, that he shares the small moment of wonder. Then you both return to the work, hands moving, logs stacking, the task gradually completing itself through patient accumulation of small actions. That evening, Prior Benedict speaks to the assembled community after Compline. He does not often address everyone outside the regular offices, so his decision to do so now carries weight. The community stands in the chapter house, the room lit by candles that cast moving shadows on the stone walls. The prior's face is serious but not stern, and when he speaks his voice carries clearly through the space. He acknowledges the difficulty of the winter that is beginning to ease. He names, without dwelling on them, the challenges faced: the cold, the illness, the strain on resources, the test of will and faith. He praises the community's steadiness, its adherence to the rule even when every instinct urged retreat into self-concern. He speaks of the brothers who have tended the sick, who have maintained the fires, who have continued the work of prayer and copying and maintenance despite numbed fingers and aching bodies. He reminds everyone that the monastery's purpose is not primarily survival, though survival is necessary, but rather the offering of continual prayer, the preservation of knowledge, the cultivation of a way of life that bears witness to particular truths about God and humanity and the relationship between them. And then he says something that surprises you slightly. He speaks of gratitude. Not the abstract gratitude that one is supposed to feel in all circumstances, not the theoretical appreciation for hardship as spiritual training, but genuine, specific gratitude for this winter, for what it has taught, for what it has revealed about the community's strengths and weaknesses, for the ways it has stripped away everything inessential and shown what remains when all comfort is removed. His words do not romanticize the suffering. He is not suggesting that cold and hunger and fear are good in themselves. But he is suggesting, gently, carefully, that they have served a purpose, that the community has been refined in some way, that you have all learned things about yourselves and each other and God that could perhaps only be learned through this particular trial. You stand listening and you feel something shift in your chest. You realize that you do feel grateful, though the gratitude is complicated, layered with relief and residual fear and exhaustion. You are grateful to have survived. You are grateful for the brothers who surrounded you, who carried their share and sometimes more than their share. You are grateful for the structure of the rule, which gave shape to days that might otherwise have collapsed into mere endurance. You are grateful for the stone walls that protected you, for the knowledge accumulated over generations about how to live through winter in such a place, for the stores carefully laid aside during autumn abundance, for the skills of brothers who knew how to heal, how to build fires, how to mend what broke, how to lead without crushing. But beyond all of that, beyond the practical causes for gratitude, you find yourself grateful for something harder to name. For the experience itself, perhaps. For having been tested and not found entirely wanting. For having touched the edge of your capacity and discovered that it extended slightly further than you had believed. For having lived through something real, something that required everything you had, something that was not metaphorical or theoretical but utterly, demandingly actual. You entered this life seeking transformation, seeking to be shaped into something closer to what you believe you are meant to be. Winter has been a harsh teacher, but perhaps an effective one. Prior Benedict concludes his remarks and leads the community in a final prayer. His voice rises in the ancient words, and your voice joins the others, the communal sound filling the chapter house and spilling out into the corridors beyond. When the prayer ends, there is a moment of profound silence, and then the prior dismisses you all to your cells. You file out slowly, the day's labor sitting in your muscles, the day's insight sitting in your mind, the day's small shifts toward spring sitting in your awareness like seeds that have not yet sprouted but have begun, beneath the soil, to swell with possibility. In your cell, you kneel for your private prayers before sleep. The stone beneath your knees is cold, but you have knelt on colder. The darkness outside your window is deep, but you have known deeper darkness. Your body is tired, but you have been more tired. Everything is relative. Everything is shaped by context and comparison and the particular frame through which you perceive it. You pray for the community, for those who are still struggling with illness or doubt, for those who will face their own winters in times and places you cannot imagine. You pray for yourself, for continued strength and patience and the kind of faith that does not require constant reassurance. You pray for the world beyond the monastery walls, for the people in villages and towns who have faced this winter with fewer resources and less protection, for travelers caught by storms, for the poor and the vulnerable and those who have no community to hold them. And then, more simply, you pray a prayer of thanks. Not elaborate, not theologically sophisticated, just a quiet acknowledgement of the day's gifts. Light. Breath. The slight easing of cold. The presence of brothers. The routine that structures chaos. The hope, fragile but persistent, that winter will indeed pass and life will renew itself as it always has. As you believe it always will. Your faith is not a thing of certainty, not anymore, if it ever was, but it is a thing of trust, of leaning into a pattern larger than yourself, of choosing to believe that meaning exists even when you cannot see it clearly. You rise and move to your cot. The blankets are thin but familiar, shaped to your body by months of use. You settle into them and close your eyes, and almost immediately you can feel sleep rising to meet you. Your last waking thought is of the snowdrops Brother Thomas mentioned, white bells pushing through frozen earth, and you smile slightly in the darkness. Then sleep takes you, and your breathing slows, and the cell around you holds its silence. The days continue to lengthen. The change is slight, almost imperceptible from one day to the next, but when you compare the present to a week ago, 2 weeks ago, a month ago, the difference is undeniable. The sun rises a little earlier, sets a little later. The light at midday reaches deeper into the church, illuminates more of the cloister, finds its way into corners that have been in shadow since autumn. You begin to see colors more clearly, the brown of wood, the gray of stone, the occasional flash of blue or green in a painted manuscript, the varied shades of black and white in the habits of the community. It is as though the world has been rendered in charcoal all winter and is now slowly being touched with pigment again. In the scriptorium, you complete the page you have been working on for weeks. The text is a passage from the Gospel of John, the opening verses that speak of light shining in darkness and the darkness not overcoming it. Your hand has formed each letter with careful attention, your mind has held each word as you copied it, and now the page is done. You sit back and look at what you have created, and you feel a small measure of satisfaction. It is not perfect. There is a place where your hand slipped slightly, a letter that is not quite as clean as it should be, but it is good. It is faithful to the original. It will serve its purpose. Brother Edmund comes to inspect your work, and he nods approvingly before moving on to check Brother Hugh's page. No words of praise, praise would be inappropriate, but the nod is enough. The work is acceptable. The work continues. That afternoon, you are sent with several others to check the condition of the outbuildings, the barn, the stable, the workshops that cluster around the main monastery complex. The snow has drifted high against some of the walls, and there is concern about whether the roofs have held under the weight of accumulated ice. You trudge through snow that comes to your knees, following the path broken by Brother Thomas, who leads the small group. The cold is still present, still demanding, but it lacks the vicious edge of deep winter. This is cold you can work in, cold that will allow you to complete a task before numbness becomes dangerous. The barn's roof is intact, though there is damage to the door where wind has worked at the hinges. Brother Thomas examines it carefully, testing the wood, checking the metal fittings. He determines that repairs can wait until weather improves, the door still closes, still provides protection, and working on it now would be more difficult than necessary. You move on to the stable where the monastery's few animals have been kept through the winter. The horses are thin, as expected, but alert and responsive when you enter. They press forward, hoping for grain, and Brother Peter speaks to them softly, running his hands over their flanks, checking for injuries or illness. He seems satisfied. They have endured. The workshops are in better condition than you feared. There is water damage in one corner where snow melted and seeped through a gap in the roof, but Brother Thomas believes it can be repaired easily once the weather fully breaks. You spend an hour moving tools and materials away from the wet area, salvaging what you can, documenting what will need to be replaced. The work is cold and your fingers grow clumsy, but there is satisfaction in the practicality of it, in addressing problems that have clear solutions. As you work, Brother Thomas speaks of the spring tasks ahead, the planting that will need to be done, the repairs that have accumulated through the winter, the general maintenance that keeps the monastery functioning. His voice is matter-of-fact, neither excited nor discouraged, simply cataloging what is. You listen and you feel yourself being drawn forward in time, pulled toward the future that Brother Thomas is describing. It helps, this forward vision. It reminds you that the present moment, however it feels, is not permanent. Change is the only constant. Seasons turn. Work continues. Life persists in finding ways forward. By the time you return to the main monastery, the light is beginning to fade and the air is taking on the sharper edge that always comes with evening. You file into the church for vespers and the warmth inside, slight as it is, feels like an embrace after the outdoor cold. You stand in your place and you join your voice to the others and you feel the day settling into the pattern of prayer and rest that has structured every day since you entered this life. The office unfolds with familiar beauty, and when it concludes you move with the others to the refectory for the evening meal. The food is simple: bread, a thin soup with bits of preserved vegetable, a small portion of cheese. You eat slowly, savoring each bite not because it is delicious but because it is fuel, because it represents the community's careful stewardship of resources, because it is enough. Around you, the other brothers eat in similar silence, broken occasionally by the sound of a spoon against wood, the quiet clearing of a throat, the soft rustle of fabric as someone shifts position. Prior Benedict sits at the head table, his own meal apparently identical to everyone else's. He eats with the same unhurried attention he brings to every action, and watching him you are reminded again of the discipline at the heart of this life, not the spectacular discipline of dramatic sacrifice, but the quiet discipline of doing what is necessary, day after day, without complaint or fanfare. After the meal, there is a brief period before Compline when you are free to move about as you wish within the monastery. Some brothers return to their cells for private prayer. Some walk in the cloister, despite the cold, seeking a moment of solitude. Some gather in small groups to speak quietly of the day's work or to discuss questions of theology or scripture. You find yourself drawn to the church, which is empty now, lit only by the single lamp that burns perpetually before the altar. You enter the quiet space and the silence wraps around you like a presence. The shadows are deep, the air is cold, the stone columns rise into darkness above. You walk slowly down the center aisle and you pause before the altar, and you stand looking at the simple cross that hangs on the wall behind it. The metal gleams faintly in the lamplight, and you think about all the prayers that have been offered in this space, all the monks who have stood where you now stand, all the winters and springs and summers and autumns that have passed while this building remained, solid and patient and enduring. You kneel, and the stone is hard beneath your knees, and you bow your head. You do not have elaborate prayers to offer right now. You are simply here, present, offering the fact of your presence as a form of prayer in itself. You breathe. You listen to the silence. You feel the cold air on your face and the weight of your body and the steady rhythm of your heart. Minutes pass, or perhaps longer. Time becomes fluid in this state, and then you hear the bell for Compline and you rise, your knees protesting slightly, and you take your place as the other brothers file in. The final office of the day is always quiet, always tinged with the sense of completion and surrender that comes with approaching sleep. You chant the psalms that speak of God's protection through the night, of rest granted to the beloved, of trust in the face of darkness. The words are ancient and familiar, and they settle over the community like a blessing. When the office ends, Prior Benedict offers the final blessing and dismisses you all to the great silence that will last until morning. You return to your cell and prepare for sleep with the same efficiency you have practiced for months. The cold is present, but manageable. The darkness is complete, but familiar. You lie in your cot and draw the blankets close and you close your eyes. Your body relaxes by increments, releasing the day's tensions, settling into stillness. Your mind continues to move for a while, reviewing the day, planning tomorrow, touching on concerns and hopes and the 100 small thoughts that arise in the space before sleep. But gradually those too begin to slow, to quiet, to dissolve into the approaching rest. Your last conscious awareness is of gratitude again, that same complicated sense of thankfulness that Prior Benedict named. You are grateful to have lived through this day, this winter, this particular passage of your life. You are grateful for the community that surrounds you even in solitude, for the rule that gives shape to your days, for the faith that undergirds everything even when you cannot feel it directly. You are grateful for the signs of spring beginning to emerge, for the promise of renewal that the turning seasons offer, for the hope that sustains effort even when results are not yet visible. And then you sleep, and the monastery around you settles into its own rest, and the night passes with the same patient inevitability as all nights pass, and the world continues its slow turning toward the light. When you wake for matins, the darkness is still complete but something has changed again. It takes you a moment to identify what is different, and then you realize, you can hear water dripping. Somewhere outside, snow is melting, running from the roofs, finding its way down walls and into drains and across pathways. The sound is faint but unmistakable, a liquid music that speaks of thaw, of ice giving way, of the first real loosening of winter's hold. You lie still for a moment longer, listening, and you feel something in your chest expanding, opening, like a fist slowly unclenching. The bell rings and you rise and join the others for the office, and as you chant the familiar psalms you hear the dripping water as a kind of descant, a natural accompaniment to the human voices lifted in prayer. No one mentions it, there is no opportunity to speak during the office, but you can see in the faces around you that others hear it too, that everyone recognizes what it means. The deep freeze is breaking. True thaw is still weeks away, the full arrival of spring is still months distant, but the direction of change has become clear. Winter is beginning to release its grip. The days that follow bring continued signs of slow transformation. The snow in the courtyard begins to shrink, revealing more of the stone pathways, more of the buried structures. The drifts against the walls slump and settle. Icicles hanging from the eaves grow longer and thinner as they melt during the day, though they still freeze again each night when temperatures drop. The light continues to strengthen, to reach further, to linger longer. In the scriptorium, Brother Edmund opens the shutters wider and for longer periods, and the natural light allows everyone to work more easily, to see details more clearly, to complete their copying with fewer errors. Brother Paul is released from the infirmary, still weak but recovering steadily. You see him at meals, at offices, moving carefully but with growing confidence. He has lost weight, and his face bears the marks of his illness, but he is present, he is participating, he is alive. Brother Anselm continues his rounds, checking on those who suffered winter complaints, dispensing remedies, offering quiet encouragement. His face shows the exhaustion of months of constant vigilance, but there is relief in his expression now, the knowledge that the worst has passed, that his patients will survive, that the community has made it through. In the kitchen, Brother Gregory begins the first preparations for spring planting. It is far too early to work the frozen ground, but seeds need to be sorted, tools need to be checked and sharpened, plans need to be finalized. You assist him one afternoon, helping to inventory the seeds stored in clay jars in the cool cellar. He shows you how to test their viability, how to calculate how much will be needed for each bed, how to plan for succession planting that will provide vegetables throughout the growing season. His voice carries knowledge accumulated over decades, and you listen carefully, understanding that you are being taught not just practical skills but a way of thinking, a way of engaging with the earth and the seasons and the cycles of growth and harvest. Brother Gregory speaks of the garden as a form of prayer, a way of participating in the divine work of creation. The connection is not new to you, you have heard similar ideas expressed before, but coming now, at the end of winter, the concept resonates differently. You think of the frozen ground outside, apparently dead, apparently lifeless, and you think of the seeds waiting in their jars, and you think of the faith required to believe that these two things, dead earth and dormant seed, will combine to produce life, abundance, sustenance. It is the same faith, you realize, that carries the community through winter, the same trust in patterns that persist even when present evidence seems to contradict them. The weeks continue to pass, each one carrying the community further from the depths of winter and closer to the threshold of spring. The change is not dramatic, there are still cold days, still nights when the wind howls and the temperature plunges, but the overall trajectory is clear. The rule continues to structure each day, the offices continue their rotation, the work continues in scriptorium and kitchen and workshop. But there is a lightness now that was absent before, a sense of burden lifting, of crisis passing, of survival secured. You find yourself thinking about time and its various scales. The hours of the day, marked by offices. The days of the week, marked by the changing liturgy. The weeks of the season, marked by gradual changes in light and temperature. The months of the year, marked by the major feasts and fasts of the church calendar. The years of a life, marked by growth and learning and gradual transformation. The centuries of the monastery's existence, marked by generations of monks who have lived and prayed and worked within these walls. Each scale of time offers a different perspective, a different way of understanding where you are and what you are doing. In the immediate moment, kneeling in a cold church at Matins, exhausted and longing for sleep, time can feel oppressive, each minute dragging with painful slowness. But pull back to the scale of a season, and the same moment becomes part of a pattern, a necessary element in a larger whole. Pull back further to the scale of a lifetime, and the season itself becomes just one passage among many, significant but not all-defining. Pull back to the scale of centuries, and individual lives become threads in a vast tapestry, each contributing to a picture too large for any single person to see clearly. You are not certain why these thoughts occupy you now, at the end of winter, but they do. Perhaps it is because you have just lived through something difficult, something that tested you in ways you had not been tested before, and you are trying to make sense of it, to fit it into a framework that allows understanding. Or perhaps it is simply that the gradual return of light and warmth allows your mind to range more freely, to contemplate questions that had to be set aside during the struggle for survival. One morning you wake before the bell and you lie in the darkness listening to the sounds of the monastery beginning to stir. You hear footsteps in the corridor, the creak of a door, the distant clang of metal on metal as someone in the kitchen begins preparations for the day. Each sound is distinct and clear, and you realize that your senses have been sharpened by months of cold and deprivation. You are more aware now, more attuned to small details, more present in each moment because each moment has mattered so much. You wonder if this heightened awareness will persist once winter fully releases its hold, once life returns to a less demanding rhythm. Part of you hopes it will. It seems valuable, this acute presence, this inability to take anything for granted. But part of you suspects that it will fade, that comfort will return and with it a kind of ease that allows inattention. You are not sure which outcome you prefer. There is value in awareness, but there is also value in rest, in not having to monitor every moment for threats or shortfalls. Perhaps the ideal is to carry forward some of what winter has taught while releasing the constant vigilance that winter demanded. But you are not sure how to achieve that balance, or if it is even possible to choose such things rather than simply letting them happen. The bell rings and you rise and begin the day, and these questions recede into the background of your mind, present but not pressing. There is work to do, offices to attend, obligations to meet. The life continues with or without your philosophical musings, and there is comfort in that, in the way the structure carries you forward even when you are uncertain of the path. As February moves toward March, the signs of approaching spring become undeniable. The snow in the courtyard is now mostly gone, leaving only a few shaded patches where drifts were deepest. The pathways are clear and you can walk without fear of ice, though mud is now a constant presence, thick and clinging. The light at midday has real warmth in it now, enough that you can stand in a sunny spot and feel it on your face like a touch. The sound of dripping water is constant during the day, a symphony of melt and flow that speaks of winter's retreat. Birds begin to appear, species you have not seen in months. They call to each other from the roof peaks and the bare branches of trees beyond the walls, and their voices add a layer of sound to the monastery's atmosphere that has been missing. You watch them during moments of rest, fascinated by their energy, their apparent confidence, their easy mastery of flight. They are creatures of instinct and pattern, arriving when the season dictates, doing what their nature commands. You envy them slightly, their lack of doubt, their inability to question the path they follow. But then you reflect that perhaps there is no real difference. You too follow patterns established long before you arrived. You too do what your nature, shaped by vows and training and faith, commands. Brother Thomas oversees the beginning of outdoor repairs. Groups of monks are assigned to check walls for damage, to clear drains clogged with winter debris, to assess roofs and shutters and gates. The work is muddy and cold, but it is good to be outside, to be active, to see the results of labor in ways that were less visible during the dark months. You work with Brother William on clearing a section of gutter that has accumulated leaves and ice, and as you pull out handfuls of rotting organic matter you find yourself laughing at the sheer unpleasantness of the task. Brother William looks at you with surprise and then he too begins to laugh, and for a moment the two of you stand in the weak spring sunlight, your hands filthy, your robes splattered with mud, laughing at nothing and everything, releasing months of tension in a burst of inexplicable joy. The laughter fades but the lightness remains. You return to the task and complete it efficiently, and when you are done the water flows freely through the gutter, carrying away the winter's accumulation, and you feel an absurd satisfaction at this small restoration of function and order. That evening at Vespers, you notice that the light coming through the high windows of the church is no longer the pale blue of winter but carries hints of gold, the warmer tones of a sun that remembers how to offer heat as well as illumination. The light falls across the stone floor in long bars, and dust motes drift through them, and you watch the pattern shift as the sun continues its slow descent toward the horizon. The office unfolds around you, the familiar psalms rising and falling, and you feel yourself held in something larger than yourself, something that has existed long before you arrived and will continue long after you depart. Prior Benedict's voice leads the community in the final prayers, and there is a note of something in his tone that you cannot quite identify, not happiness exactly, not relief exactly, but perhaps a kind of quiet satisfaction, the recognition of a task completed adequately if not perfectly. The community has survived. The winter has been endured. The monastery persists. These are not small things. After Compline, as you walk to your cell through corridors that no longer feel quite so hostile, you realize that you have changed in ways you are only beginning to understand. You are thinner, certainly. Everyone is thinner after a winter like this one. You are stronger in some ways, tested and proven capable of endurance you did not know you possessed. You are more patient, more accepting of discomfort, more willing to trust in patterns that extend beyond your immediate understanding. But there are other changes too, subtler and harder to name. You are more connected to the community, bound to these men by shared struggle in ways that ordinary time does not create. You are more aware of your dependence on structures and systems and accumulated wisdom, less confident in your individual capacity to navigate difficulty alone. You are more humble, perhaps, having been brought to the edge of your resources and shown how little separates survival from disaster. You are more grateful, more conscious of gifts that you previously took for granted: warmth, light, food, health, companionship, shelter. And you are more convinced, somehow, that this life you have chosen, this strange life of prayer and work and deliberate simplification, is worth the cost. Not because it is easy. Not because it protects you from suffering. Clearly it does not. But because it offers something that justifies the difficulty, something you could not find elsewhere, something you are only beginning to glimpse. Purpose, perhaps. Meaning. A sense of participation in something that transcends individual comfort or success. A way of being human that refuses the culture's dominant values and insists on different priorities, different measures of worth. You reach your cell and you enter and close the door and you stand for a moment in the small space that has been your refuge and your trial. The stone walls are the same, the narrow window is the same, the simple cot is the same. But you are not the same. Winter has shaped you, marked you, changed you in ways you will spend years understanding. And that seems right, somehow. That seems like exactly what this life promises: not ease, not comfort, but transformation. Slow, painful, costly transformation that nevertheless produces something valuable, something true, something worth the price. You kneel for your final prayers and the words come easily now, flowing from some deep place within you that winter has perhaps hollowed out or perhaps filled. You pray for the community, for each brother by name, holding them in your awareness before God. You pray for those beyond the walls, for the world that continues its struggles and joys mostly unaware of the small community in its midst. You pray for yourself, for continued strength and faith and the grace to accept whatever comes next. And you pray words of thanks, simple and direct, for having been brought through winter to this threshold of spring, for having been held and shaped and sustained through the cold months, for the gift of survival and the promise of renewal. Then you rise and prepare for sleep, and as you lie in the darkness waiting for rest to come, you hear through the narrow window a sound you have not heard in months, the call of a nightbird, clear and musical, announcing its territory to the emerging spring. You smile in the darkness and you close your eyes, and sleep comes gently, and the night passes in peace, and when morning comes the world will be a fraction lighter, a fraction warmer, a fraction closer to the fullness of spring. But that is tomorrow. For now, there is just this moment, this breath, this surrender to rest after labor, this trust that morning will indeed come as it always has, as you believe it always will. The stone around you is silent and patient. The community sleeps in their scattered cells. The church stands empty and watchful. The winter is ending. the cycle turns. And you rest in the knowledge that you are part of something larger, something enduring, something that will continue its patient witness through seasons and years and centuries, offering its strange gift to a world that perhaps does not understand but might, in moments of clarity, recognize as necessary, as valuable, as holy. The darkness deepens and the silence grows profound, and you drift into sleep like a boat released to the current, trusting the water to carry you where you need to go. And the monastery stands around you, stone and faith and accumulated wisdom, holding you and all the others through another night, another passage, another turn of the great wheel that brings all things back to light in their season, in their time, in the fullness that only patience and endurance and trust can reveal.